Welcome to the January 8th Village Board Work Session. We have a very full and interesting meeting ahead of us. And I'd like to begin by inviting my colleagues on the Village Board to provide any comments or announcements. Who would like to go first?
Good evening. I'll go first. Good to see everyone. So first, want to let everybody know that the latest episode of Virtual Village is online. It's available on the Village's Facebook page, perhaps on YouTube coming out sometime soon. But it is me interviewing Mary Howard from Penny and Ting. And we have a great conversation about how she started the toy store, what the biggest sellers have been during the coronavirus, and what different toys she recommends for different age ranges, including for adults. There's some popular toys that adults are scooping up. So look out for that. The Ossining Public Library has bilingual story time that it's doing on Wednesdays at 11 a.m. So you can look on their social media. It's also on my Facebook page, information on that. Our census numbers, we are at 59.7%, almost at 60. I am, so we're about 5 points away from where we were 10 years ago. And the minimum bar we want to hit is where we were 10 years ago. We want to go far beyond that. And so right now what I'm doing is crowdsourcing some ideas for how we can spread the word. So if you have any great ideas, there's no wrong answer. The more it's out there, the better. On Saturday, July 18th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. So not this Saturday, but the following Saturday. So I'll do another announcement next week. Star of Bethlehem is partnering with Open Door to have a community health fair, and they'll have free COVID testing. They'll have free HIV/AIDS testing and also blood pressure testing. So you can walk in without an appointment, but you can also make an appointment by going to the website for Star Bethlehem, which is www.starbethbc.org. And we have, lastly, gotten some questions from the community about coronavirus guideline enforcement. And so I know that we're going to be talking about the police later on. Mayor, do you want to have that piece now or save it for later?
I think we're going to have a more robust discussion later because we want to get some feedback from our staff, but it's good that you've acknowledged that that is something you're hearing a lot about, and people want to keep everyone in line and make sure our community keeps going in the right direction. And sometimes it's tough for us to even know who they should be reporting things to and then what. So that's one of the things we're going to be discussing later tonight, but thanks for bringing that up now.
Absolutely. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Anybody else from the board with comments or questions to kick us off this evening?
I'm good, thank you.
Really? Okay. Manny, Bob, you're good? All right. Then I just have a couple of things. Who would have thought such a quiet day at the start of our meeting? But that's great because we have a big meeting ahead of us. So I'll just say congratulations to the 4 families that won the house decorating contest, the most patriotic houses in Ossining. Thank you so much for participating. And I was the staff photographer who went out and got to visit the homes, and that gave me an opportunity to speak with a number of the folks who did the decorating, which was always nice to be able to talk to folks in the community about something so lighthearted. And it was one of the families that just moved to Ossining a few weeks ago, and they're finding out what are the fun things they can do in our community, and so it was nice to be able to welcome them with an award for being the craftiest decorated patriotic home. So that it's so much of the news that we've been dealing with and the announcements that we've been dealing with have been really heavy, difficult topics. So it's fun to have something a little more lighthearted. And sticking with the theme of lighthearted and fun, As we continue on our path to a phased reopening, this week we opened fields that followed the playgrounds, and the spray ground is now open. So there are so many more opportunities to be outdoors, and everything that we're hearing is that being outdoors does make a difference in keeping the rate of transmission down, but that doesn't mean that we can stop doing all the other things. That still means you need to keep your distance and wear a mask. If you're ever within 6 feet, wear a mask and wash and sanitize your hands. And don't travel to hotspots. So these are the things that we know we need to be doing. And as we keep doing more and more testing and being that much more cognizant of how many people in our community are testing positive, we are seeing a little bit of an uptick in the number of active cases in the village, and that's not the direction we want to go in. We were up to 13 today. Last week we were down to 6. That could just be a little bit of a blip, and maybe we'll be going back down in the better direction next week. And I don't know if that's just Ossining, as I did not do an analysis of every other community. Generally, New York is still doing very well. So it's really just up to us to be able to do everything that we know we need to be doing. Meanwhile, we heard from the governor, and we're going to be hearing more guidelines next week for what's going to happen with school in the fall. And then by the end of the month, hopefully the Ossining School District will be able to tell us what's happening with our schools. And so the very best thing that all of us can do is take responsibility for ourselves and for our family. And later on this evening, we'll try and figure out how to tell people if they want or need to report something or have a concern, exactly how you do that. As the rules keep changing and the phases keep evolving, it's tough for folks to sometimes know what they're supposed to be doing or what the rules even are. And then when somebody's blatantly violating them, who do you contact? Is the police, the building department, is the Department of Health, and sometimes it's not even clear to us. So we're trying to figure this all out together on a local and county level. So we'll try and get some clarity on that and see if there's anything we can be doing on a local level to send a clearer message so we can keep going in the right direction in our community. And with that, I will say, Madam Manager, let's get started on this exciting agenda.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everybody. Before I start, I have one brief announcement. I would like to announce that we'll be appointing Nina Aaron to the Zoning Board of Appeals as an alternate member. Nina is a relatively recent resident of Ossining. She moved here about 1.5 years ago with her husband, Frank Buddy, who is on the Comprehensive Plan Committee. Nina is also recently retired, but she was most recently a planner in New Rochelle. She brings a lot of experience, and we're excited to have her on the ZBA. So with that, that leads me into our next planning topic. We have our consultants from BFJ, Frank Fish and Simon Cates here tonight to talk about, they're going to be talking about lead agency role for environmental review. So I will turn it over to them right now. Thank you.
Thank you. We're just going to do a very brief PowerPoint presentation. Tonight, what we'd like to do is, as the manager just said, is to just review where we are on the State Environmental Quality Review Act in relationship to the comprehensive plan. So this next slide just goes through our comprehensive plan steering committee members. I think all of the trustees have seen this slide, and it's an important just for us that the trustees are represented on the committee. And then we've been working with village staff, particularly Karen and the village planner, and all of the key people listed here. I think I've introduced us before to all of the trustees, so you know the team, and I think we can go to the next slide. We're working away on the draft sections of the plan, though, so this is a little bit just to give you an update of where we are. We're completed now a draft review with our Committee of the Land Use and Zoning. We've gotten really agreement on that. So that is a draft that's available online now. So we've got 2 chapters online. We've got the waterfront plan chapter, which will be submitted Friday for internal review. And we're starting to work now on the downtown and economic development chapter. You can see our dates there to provide summaries of these to our committee. So we're sort of on schedule for the plan. And an important part of this, I think, for the trustees, or the next slide, just goes in a little bit to, we discussed with you the last time we mentioned the plan with you all, just what the lead agency was for Sinker. And then this chart from on the right there from DEC. The first step is really to determine that you are the lead agency. And you are the only ones that can be. State law mandates that a comprehensive plan be adopted in a village's case by the Board of Trustees, the Village Board of Trustees. So what we've done is we've submitted to Karen and Jaime, we've submitted an environmental assessment form, which I'll get into in a minute. And then we're hoping that you would be able to declare yourself lead agency at your next, regular meeting. And what that does is it allows you to start the seeker process. The next steps, as we went over last time, is once you are the lead agency, is to determine the significance of the action. And we think with the zoning, now that people can see it, you've all got copies, and copies are available, that some of the zoning things we're starting to look at could have impacts, and it may make sense to do a generic environmental impact statement, but you have to determine that. So the first thing is to declare lead agency at your next meeting, and then after that, we can get into what's called part 2 of the EAF, give that to you, and then sometime in the summer, we were hoping you could make a determination of significance. That is, determine that if this action has some environmental impacts, I think your planner feels that it would be good to do a positive declaration and do a full environmental impact statement, which goes, this whole chart brings you through. If you determine that over the summer, then we could have a scoping session to outline the EIS. But the first step, which we've outlined in yellow here, we hope at your next meeting you could just establish yourselves as lead agency. So the next slide really just discusses this environmental assessment form. We've sent it into Karen, and I think this should, Karen, hopefully be distributed before the 15th, I guess, the next trustees meeting. So the trustees all have this, and Stuart has it and can review it. By the way, I would say to everyone, as you get this, this is called the long form environmental assessment form. It's a state form. And you'll see in it that, I just want to highlight to you this third dot point. There are 2 sections of it. If you read through it, you're going to say to yourself, oh, they forgot to do sections D and E, and they're the biggest, longest sections. We're not supposed to do those in the EAF. If it's a generic or area-wide EAF, that's only meant for usually development proposals that are site-specific. So this is an area-wide action. So those 2 sections are not filled out. And we have not spent time on appendices to this, because if you, and as we've discussed, I think it is probably likely that you'll want to do a full EIS. We will go into all of that detail in the EIS. So that's really the sort of EAF form. And so we're hoping you could take a look at that before the 15th, and we need to just, I know that your legal counsel would normally do your resolutions, and I'll just talk briefly with Stuart in the coming days just to make sure we're all set, and I guess you will probably get a resolution from him. So with that, I'm going to, well, maybe I should stop for a moment. Any questions on the lead agency designation? Great.
Frank, I don't have any questions on the lead agency designation, but where you had gone before and you talked about some of the chapters that you've been working on.
Oh, yes.
One of the chapters that you've got a draft done on is the waterfront.
Yes, we have gone over it in-house. We'll be sending it for internal review. We hope this Friday or at least Monday at the latest to Karen. So Jaime can take a look at it. It's not quite.
But Frank, this is not like I just want to be clear. This is internal based on existing desk research and information.
Yes,
we
that's
have
right.
not done any stakeholder meetings or any, we haven't gotten the input. So really this is a very preliminary draft.
It's data driven, and it's partly also reliant somewhat on the existing plan, the 2009 plan, and then the also other plans on the waterfront.
Okay, it makes me, every time if we write something, then we've got a starting point. And what makes me a little nervous about that is the existing plan is 11 years old, and we're still trying to schedule a follow-up plan with Cornell and the Hudson Estuary Project to really understand and be able to review with current staff and the rest of the trustees in the community the data about our waterfront that was explored as part of last year's study. And so it just makes me a little nervous. My understanding was that these subcommittee meetings, you'd have the subcommittee meeting, get an understanding from the stakeholders relevant to whatever the upcoming chapter was, then write the chapter, and then get feedback. So writing the chapter before you have what I consider to be all the data that you need or the feedback just makes me a little nervous. And the waterfront is such an important chapter for us, especially in this moment.
So I wanted to, I'd like to mention, so there is some baseline information that needs to be aggregated as a part of the process for doing the waterfront. And that's the same kind of baseline information that went into previous plans. It's like knowing who the property owners are, knowing where the water is, knowing where the elevations are for the different things, floodplains. A lot of that is kind of baseline information that needs to go into the base of the chapter. So it is important to understand that there are, as of yet, no recommendations, and there's a lot of input that needs to go into what needs to be considered and what needs to be recommended. So I do understand like maybe a concern about the text driving the discussion moving forward, but we have been very careful to be very clear that that is not what is to be happening here.
I guess what worries me is it's becoming more and more clear that there are, there's a lot of different ways to look at the data. And that was one of the things, you were on the call that we had a week or two ago with Scenic Hudson, and we talked about the different platforms. Scenic Hudson has one, and then the Columbia data, which is what was used for CAD, has a lot more information about our tributaries and the stormwater impacts. And that is all very different and much more detailed than regular FEMA maps that are currently used by developers. So I just want to make sure that, I guess the way you said it is that the conversation isn't driven by the draft, but that the draft is driven by all the data that we have that is as comprehensive as possible. And we spent all this time doing all of these studies and getting all of these experts to help us understand our waterfront more. I want to make sure that that's all brought to bear when we write this draft. So it just makes me a little nervous. So I'm going to say it again. I think I've said it every time we've talked about this. So
it's an important point. Yeah, it's an important point, and it's one that we've taken very seriously in terms of just trying to make sure that we go about this process in a sort of in an academic way to look at all the available information as well as reaching out to the community and getting the voices and making sure we follow the guidance that y'all have set forth for us. So by no means that chapter draft is not any more than a draft at this point.
Okay.
It's also baseline information. So when we talk about baseline information, it leaves a lot of opportunity to look at things from a different perspective. So again, this isn't the evaluating other ways to look at the floodplains. All of that is following the next steps. All of the input comes in next. So none of these actually. That's just to be clear that the baseline stuff really is existing information. So no recommendations have been made. Nothing's going to happen without recommendations, and we still have a long time to go through this process.
I hear you. I guess what I'm saying is I'm not even talking about recommendations. I'm saying I want to be sure we're actually using all of the data that has been provided to us.
I think that what you're honing in on is the difference in the projections The FEMA maps are pretty conservative. There are other sources like the Columbia data that is a little more, some might call it aggressive, some might call it more realistic in terms of
Respected
what.
by environmentalists. Yeah.
So I think that, we have to kind of identify the various different sources and sort of look at that. Even within the Columbia data, I think that there was sort of these projections of like, it could be bad, it could be really bad, or it could be terrible, kind of.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And so trying to understand the differences in projections that are available to us and coming up with plans that take into account any of those options.
Well, it looks like the summary is expected to be done internally by the 21st. I think it's not until a week later, so that we're supposed to be scheduling a meeting to, further discuss this with the folks from Cornell and the DEC that we worked with last year. So, I don't know exactly what it looks like now or what you're doing by July 21st, but, to me, that's like, super preliminary, and to say there's not recommendations yet is like, it's more than that.
Yeah, Mayor, I see each of these chapters of, I think the one that is a good example perhaps is the zoning chapter, which is now online. It's going to be an iterative process. For instance, now over the summer that we have a little bit of direction, we're going to be doing more work on the zoning chapter. So it's not a chapter, although it's up there online. We've got a lot of ideas out there that, as you know, we saw and we went over with the trustees. It's going to be refined more. And then as we get going on these chapters and get more input, we'll put more into them. It'll be iterative to a point, say in probably October, November, where state law asks the committee to have their own hearing. It is a public hearing by the committee, and it's described in state law as just an interim hearing while the plan is in progress. So everybody, again, has a chance to revisit the chapters, and only then would it be in a position to eventually, sometime around Thanksgiving to Christmas period, go to you, the trustees, for your further work. So I see each chapter as iterative. It's not going to be, I don't see zoning right now, for instance, which is up online, as the, the final recommendations by any means.
That's fine. I guess for me, this isn't a matter of recommendations of the waterfront. It's just that doing baseline information about data and not having all the data being utilized is what makes me nervous. But go ahead. I've more than made my point. Again,
Yes.
just making this point, and I feel like I'm not being heard because I keep making the same point, and we're still not.
No, we do hear the point, and it certainly wouldn't behoove us to do something and not use available data. So whether it's the waterfront or any other chapter, the data that we're going to be evaluating will be based on the most recent data, the most respected data, the most valid data, regardless of the chapter. So there's no instance where we would be saying, oh, there's good data out there, let's not use it. So all of that will be taken into consideration. So, and that data, though, just to be clear, exists independent of anything that Cornell did. Cornell did the design to mitigate it, but the data is out there. So
then was the Columbia data used
for the preliminary mapping that we did in this so far? Did we incorporate that too, Jaime?
I'm going to have to defer to Simon. Can you?
The Scenic Hudson data, which is based on New York State Department of Environmental Conservation.
Okay, so my understanding from Scenic Hudson when we met with them a week and a half ago is that theirs is great, but it is not as detailed as the Columbia data, because the Columbia data includes storm surge impact, stormwater impact, which is a big deal for all of our tributaries.
Yes, and Mayor, just, I did attend the whole Columbia presentation in White Plains on their data. So if you want, we can spend, we've seen the data. The reason we've zeroed in a little bit on what Jaime just said, the Scenic Hudson and DEC data, is the DEC data actually has regulatory control, that those 100-year floodplains are based on the DEC projections. That doesn't mean we don't look at other data. like Cornell and Columbia, but the actual 100-year floodplain is what the federal government and the state in your LWRP uses as a control. So we've tended to focus on that, but we don't want to exclude other good information.
Right, because sometimes the federal government doesn't want to use all the science that's available. And tributaries are pretty significant to us, and storms are pretty significant in impacting what happens on to all of our hundreds of properties that align them.
Yep. Okay.
Thanks. And I know I interrupted. You were going to do something else. You were asking about how we feel about the next week's simple little EAF, and I'm good with that. So.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Good. If there's any questions on the very straightforward EAF, you're right in being lead agency. Otherwise, I'll turn it to Simon to summarize some of the public outreach that we've done.
Great, thank you, Frank. Thanks everyone for being here. We just think it's always good when we check in with all of you to do a bit of an update on where we are in public engagement throughout the process. The first one that I'll highlight again, we always try to turn back to this, is the project website, ossiningtomorrow.com. This is our hub of online engagement activities, so we encourage everyone to visit the website. Under the Get Involved tab, there are a series of ways to find out how to provide input or take part in the different online tools that we have available and we'll have available going forward. Also under the Documents tab, Frank highlighted that we have a couple of chapters that are up in draft form online so far, as well as some background materials that we've been referring to throughout the process so far. That's a great place to go to see those drafts and take a look at the progress that we've made. So we encourage everyone to take a look at the website. There are also a series of interactive online tools that we've been working on so far and that are going to continue into the fall. The one that we've gotten a lot of feedback on so far is the Ideas Wall. It's been open now for about 2 months. I think there has been some social media on this in the last couple of days. There's been some nice activity on the Ideas Wall just in the past week or so. But that's been up for a good amount of time. We've gotten some feedback and we're working toward moving on to the next tool, which is the public survey. It's getting ready to go live on this Friday. We've been working with village staff on getting an e-blast out, and we'll have a series of social media posts going forward on the public survey as well. The survey is a great tool for us to start to dig into some questions that we have about a particular areas of interest. The survey will be open for just shy of a month, and then working into August and September, there's going to be another online tool, an interactive map, which will allow people to not just comment but also place a pin on a map and show us exactly where they think you need improvements for pedestrians, or be a great place for a pocket park, or whatever the issues are that folks have that they want to highlight. And that's going to be very focused on questions around the chapters of the plan. And this is an opportunity to turn back to a point that Frank made a moment ago, which is that even though we've been doing some baseline research and putting together some initial thoughts about what might go into these chapters, as we get information from the survey, from the interactive map, the drafts that we've worked on so far, the ones that we're working on through the summer, are absolutely not set in stone. We need to keep hearing from folks, and we'll make changes to existing conditions as we learn more, and as we get toward understanding recommendations and more details. All of these online tools are going to be critical for us in developing those details. So keep an eye on both ossiningtomorrow.com, the website, and also the village's social media pages, so that you can see see when these different resources are going to be available for folks to participate in.
Simon?
Sure.
If you could go back one slide, thanks. Is there a reason why the Ideas Wall will be done on July 10th?
Only that we felt like it was time to transition to the next tool. If there's interest in keeping it open and trying to get some more engagement, we're certainly not opposed to that. But it's been up for a couple of months. We've gotten some good ideas, and we we thought it was sort of time to go to the next tool, which drills in, as I said, to some more specific questions. But if you have other thoughts on that, we're certainly, not opposed to, to keeping that open for longer.
Yeah, so I would have two thoughts. One is I would push to keep the ideas wall open through at least September 14th when the interactive map is done. And my sense is that we'll have the interactive map and so forth. Like the reason that it's September 14th is because after that date, then you're taking all of this and then incorporating it into the draft or like the various drafts of these different chapters. But to have, I think it would be valuable to have kind of one ongoing place where, because we're constantly getting ideas. Like one that recently came out was that New York changed its laws, making it so that now midwives can have birthing centers and they can like own birthing centers, run birthing centers. Previously had to be connected to hospitals run by doctors and it was a whole thing. But now birthing centers can be run by midwives. And somebody asked, well, why doesn't Ossining get a birthing center? That would be a great idea. I go, great, put it on the ideas wall. And to be able to do that after Friday would, I think, be valuable as well.
Omar, that's fine, I think. I would mention though on, that's great on the ideas wall. We hope though on what we find is things get, I'll just speak to the survey ahead of time. The survey, we've always found with a survey to give about 3 to 4 weeks because people have to have a sense of a deadline on the survey. So I think by keeping up the ideas wall, for a longer period of time is good.
Yeah, that survey piece definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
Great. And then just here, this is our last slide. I wanted to just close with I know this is a lot of words, but just sort of a more comprehensive view of some of the other things that we've been working on that are ways for the public to follow along and also get involved. First are the steering committee meetings. Those are working sessions, but they're of course open to the public. They're on Zoom. They're also posted to YouTube after the fact, so folks can watch in real time, but also observe afterward. The mayor mentioned earlier the subcommittee meetings, which we've been working through. We had a series of these back in the middle of June, and there's going to be another round coming up, hopefully this month. We're working with Karen and Jaime to make sure that we've got a good cross-section of stakeholders for these different subcommittee meetings. But again, as we are developing the chapters, even if we've done some work before, it's not to say that we're not going to incorporate new information that we hear. We know that that's part of the process, and we'll work iteratively, as Frank also said, to make sure that we're including all that information in the chapters. This is our second time up on the top right of the screen here. The second time that we've briefed all of you. We expect to brief you multiple more times throughout the process, and so we're going to stay close with village staff on the right times to do that. But it's so important that we see all of you throughout the process, so that we don't get to the tail end and we find that you aren't aware of what we're working on. So even some of the comments that we've gotten tonight, it's good for us to hear from all of you throughout the process, so that we know how we need to adjust along the way. We also had the virtual village hall back in late April. That was a nice way to for us to present sort of an intro of what was going on, and also hear some questions from the public. So that was a nice way to hear from folks as well. Normally we would do that kind of thing, a town hall meeting in person, and we get to meet members of the community, and hopefully we're able to do that at some point here in Ossining as well. And finally, Frank mentioned that the steering committee is mandated by state law to have a public hearing. We're anticipating the steering committee public hearing in October or November. We sure hope that could be in person, but we'll be flexible depending on where everything stands with COVID at that point. And then again, there's the Board of Trustees public hearing, which has to happen before all of you sign off on the final plan. In our overall timeline, we're anticipating that would be not until the winter, until February of next year. So quite a few opportunities we hope for folks to stay involved and provide input along the way. And with that, that's our last bit here. So any questions either on Frank's piece on lead agency or on public outreach from the trustees?
I don't know, is anybody else right? Can you take the presentation off so we could see each other?
Absolutely.
Hi, good evening. So this is great. I'm trying to sort of get some context to this conversation, if you could help me out with that. You had, I'm hearing two things going on here. The words that are being used are, in my mind, maybe causing some issues. When we talk about chapters and we talk about a plan, really what you're talking about is data collections that you're doing. A baseline, somebody had said, or data collection. Not really a chapter about zoning. It's basically data collection. I just looked at it on the website. You're not really, you're looking at, you're inventorying different studies, collating through data, and then putting them into this thing called a zoning chapter. But the headline says a plan, and that's not what plans are, actually. That's like a chapter of a chapter, in a sense. It's a little deceiving, because if I were just to come on the website and read the zoning, and every single data point on there says 2020. So I don't know if this is information from 2020, or it's because you gathered it in 2020. Some of the zoning stuff there has been around for a long time. It's not like it was created in 2020. So it's a little bit hard to understand the difference between a draft chapter and basically inventory of studies and collection of data, because it feels like you're actually doing the latter, because you haven't had stakeholder meetings per se. You've had some online input on a macro level. So I find the wording to be a little bit difficult. I totally get the iterative part. Which is we're putting some chapters together, and we're going to go back to chapters piece by piece as we get stakeholder, and then we enrich that chapter, is the way I would say it. We add pieces to it. We change things. That's how you put this whole thing together. Is that really the vision of how you're doing this plan, or is it cumulative?
Rinka, maybe I could start by using that zoning chapter as an example. That is more than, it is both data and it is also ideas based on stakeholder meetings. Let me just, by what I mean by the stakeholder meetings, some of them were individual, like Stuart, your legal counsel, and Simon and I had a conversation. We also had a conversation with your building inspector and with the chair of the ZBA and the chair of the Planning Commission, and then of course with our committee. So it is existing data in the zoning, but it's also based on talking with individual people, and then talking with the committee, and of course talking a lot with your planner, with Jaime, so that we have ideas in that zoning chapter that we've put out. For instance, that form-based idea in downtown, and how to handle or deal with ideas on the T-zone, the two-family zone, and also some multifamily ideas. So those ideas are in there. It is more than data. I don't want to leave you with the impression. We've taken a crack at a draft chapter. It doesn't yet have firm recommendations because it has to go through the process, but it has both data and ideas, and they are in the zoning. I hope that Jonathan's presentation, to the, oh, that's right. I know you didn't, not everyone saw it, but we've got quite a lengthy list of ideas on how to address the T-zone and how to address downtown. So I'm hoping, some of those ideas came from the trustees. And so I'm hoping that that zoning chapter is a beginning point. But it is both data and ideas. Or I could call them issues.
Yeah, I think it's also kind of important to note that there are some key distinctions between the zoning and land use chapter and the waterfront chapter. And for the zoning and land use chapter, there are a lot of identified needs for changes that have been identified either through work that Stuart has done, work that Joe Agostinelli has done, or things that have been identified by the different, trustee members that have said we need to make these changes. The waterfront is something that I think that we all recognize is much more delicate due to the precarious nature of how close it is to the water and sea level rise and everything else. So there was more opportunity to provide kind of input and ideas into the land use and zoning early on, but that's going to continue, I think, to evolve as well quite a bit. Whereas the waterfront, I think there's a lot more discussion that needs to be made, and it's been clearly, identified that we need to sort of go slow and make sure that we're using the right information and coming up with something that makes sense for the waterfront.
So if I read something on the zoning, because it's online and I'm looking at it now, and I disagree with something or want to comment on it as a resident in this community, how do I do that? And what happens to that?
You can do that directly to the committee, to your fellow trustees, two of whom are on the committee. So you can do it directly through them. You can do it on the ideas wall, and you can do it directly, I guess, through Karen and Jaime. And we will hear that. We will hear it.
So, right. So all the more reason why the idea wall, if that's one of the venues, needs to remain open, so that as people look through it, they would be able to ask the questions. To, I guess, Omar's point, it's not written that way. So I think we just have to sort of be cognizant of that.
I think the idea behind the ideas wall versus the survey are sort of similar in that they're trying to gather information about people's concerns in the community. And so I think that what we've been trying to do as a committee is to really sort of pivot to the survey, because the ideas wall, a lot of people kind of got involved at the beginning. As time goes by, there's less interest. It's being pushed out by Facebook. We had a really good e-blast response when the mayor wrote an e-blast telling people about it. And it sort of has faded from interest. So the idea is now to bring the survey in. It's still covering a lot of the same stuff, but to kind of renew people's interest in this. But it's talking about the same things. The survey is, it's over 30 to weigh in, but it's a more pointed way of trying to get answers to those questions and following a different path. So I think the idea of taking the ideas wall down was mostly so that we could sort of focus our efforts on the survey at this point. But your point is well taken. If the steering committee wants to keep the ideas wall up while we're also doing the survey, then there's nothing technical preventing us from doing that.
Right.
Okay. And so when you said you got a lot of responses or a lot of ideas on the idea walls, could you, and you don't have to do it now, but I'd be interested to see what response rates are to each of these items.
Sure.
Relatively speaking, what we're calling a lot of responses still ends up only being a few hundred responses for the entire municipality. So it's not
a few hundreds actually for an open-ended first out of the gates. Actually, a good number. I'd actually like to see the number. Like, I don't know what a few hundred is. So if you could tell me how many people, because at some point we'll have a responsibility to the public who will have members who say, I didn't know about this. Nobody told me. I didn't get a chance to say, well, there were 280 people who had input to this. Every member of the staff was asked for input. There were subcommittees made up of X number of people. A survey went out at this and this time. That got, 1,400 people to I mean, there has to be information to the public that, and we've learned from experience, good and bad, and I haven't seen any of those numbers or response rates. I would find that helpful for context of what a lot of responses, sort of a lot, some responses look like, so that we can assure ourselves that people are seeing this information and that there is a nice response rate. If there isn't a good response rate, either we didn't send it out in a way that people knew about it, or people knew about it, may not be so interested in it, or we didn't send it to the right people, et cetera, et cetera. But if there's a decent response rate, these are not exactly like reading crime novels. I mean, it's a survey about municipal stuff. I'm not expecting it to be on the bestseller list, but I'd like to know that it was, 500 people and not 5. And I'd like to know that and have that as trustees a year from now, not just at this moment in time. So I
totally
find that helpful.
Rico, we totally agree with you. So we can give you that data. We'll give it to.
That's great.
Yeah, here's a thought. I don't have it in front of me from Social Pinpoint, the tool that we're using for this online these online tools, but we can pull that data for the ideas wall, and maybe we can do a sort of a report on that to the steering committee at the next meeting on July 21st.
You could also just add a widget onto all of your surveys and keep a reader of how many people looked at it, even if they didn't reply to it, because there'll be people that look at it but don't reply, and that could be double the number, and at least we'll be able to say, yeah, they actually did reach a lot of people. Not everybody wants to answer. Did you say 30 question survey? Not everybody wants to answer a 30 question, but 5,000 people saw it, so they did reach people. You could put a counter on all of this stuff, actually. You could also put a counter on how many times people looked at this material. Since I just looked at it twice today, you'll get two points from me. So this is very helpful. I appreciate it.
Just to build off of what the Deputy Mayor said, is it would be helpful to the extent that you have this information to have comparable data from other municipalities. Not to say here's like a number, but to say like in general, when we've done the ideas wall, we get a response of 200 posts on the ideas wall on average. Ossining had 250. So that just puts it in context, because if you give a number, it's hard to know in the abstract whether it's good or not. So comparing it to the average, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, we can do, Omar, where we can really do that particularly well is the survey coming up, because we've done so many of them. The ideas wall we're using, it's a pretty new tool, and we're using it actually here in Ossining and our other work, partly because of the COVID. These would be exercises we would have done in a charrette, 2 hour long or 2.5 hour long. So on that one, we'll have less comparable data. We'll still have data. For the survey, for instance, our target usually in a survey like this is to try hard to get a 5% return of your total households, if we can do that. That's to give you the comparable of what we've been finding in other communities in Westchester. If we can beat that number, that would be very good. But that's a usual goal of a survey. I hate to say that ahead of the survey, but you asked, so that's a goal for it.
Okay.
I want to piggyback on this. I wasn't going to comment on this, but it was a comment made that in regards to some of the items that was discussed in our last meeting. And when I say the last meeting, that the steering committee meeting, we did not, unless I'm mistaken, and Omar, please correct me if your recollection is different, but we did not address any, we did not talk about any zoning. I was expected to have that conversation. We did not. I know there was a zoning subcommittee that took place, and I'll review those documents for for our next meeting, because there were some topics and some items that we were supposed to go over that. So I want to make sure that is not reflected when Frank, when you made a statement that the trustees review this, it wasn't really accurate, because we did not.
I'm sorry, I meant to say the committee, Omar. Yeah.
It's Manuel, sorry. The other item is we did talk about the waterfront, and the waterfront discussions. We did had some back and forth discussions in regards to what it should be and how should we be addressing this. So I'm curious to see as well to read the very rough draft, preliminary draft above all these things. So I just want to make sure that that is clear, that, Enrica, please read the documents, and I urge everybody else to read these documents and get feedback on this, because this is for us. This is for the village of Ossining. this is some documents that are very important for the next 10 years. So I urge everyone to actually read it and send comments to all of us, because this is important documents that, sometime next year, the village board is going to be voting on it, and it's going to stay there for a very long time. So, and there's drastic changes in some aspects, and maybe some minor changes in other ones. So, I want to make sure that, it's very clear and very concise when you guys come in front of us, the documents and the information that is related to us is related to everybody else in there. I know there's going to be some subcommittees meetings that we are going to be participating in as well, or at least just being part of the conversation. So, which was helpful from our last steering committee that they came out. That was something that was required or asked for us to be participating on this, or at least be part of the listening portion. So I'm looking forward to see what the next meeting looks like, and the additional documents and the additional information that is being provided to us. So
great. Okay.
Okay, great. I think most of the trustees have gotten to comment. Oh, Bob, good. There you are. Did you want to comment, Bob, or ask any questions at this stage?
No, like I said, this is my first one. I'm sucking it up like a sponge right now, so I'm really going to just sit back and hopefully learn from this.
Well, frankly, it's the first one for most of us. Not Karen, because Karen was on the last comp plan steering committee, weren't you, Karen? As a resident, not as yet an elected official or as a village manager. So she's one of our most seasoned professionals in this. Manny, you weren't on the board when the last time it passed, right? No, that was like the year before you joined, or maybe 2 years before. You came on in 2011, right? 2012. Yeah, okay. So anyway, so for most of us, this is new, except for the planning specialist and Karen. So, this is very helpful. Thank you very much for coming back and doing another update for us. I love data and the maps, and that's all a really fun way to understand and our community. It is one of those challenging things, like, we're in the middle of the census right now, and we know that we're an undercounted community. And so when I see this data that suggests that our population is barely growing, and whereas our school population in the last decade has increased by 20%, there's just a disconnect. So I know that part of it is the challenge in getting accurate data. You can only share as accurate a data as is available. So I'm just wondering if you all can just give me a 10-second explanation on the data that you used and why that is the preferred data for these demographics.
Mayor, for the population.
Yeah, I mean, for the chapter that goes into, it's got many pages of looking at our population and demographic breakdown, and it's fascinating. But I know that it's not all of us. So it's just I know our population has grown a lot more than what that is, but I realize that we're a little limited because not everybody raises their hand and says, "Here I am. This is who I am." But what is the data that you use, and why do you choose that?
There are several sources of the data, but the major one is the census data. And we would be the first to agree with you that Ossining, as well as Mount Vernon, Yonkers, Portchester, there's a lot of communities that have traditionally been, we believe, there's been some undercount, or there's been some degree of difficulty for the census takers to get everybody to take the forms. So there is that. However, the sense in the demographers say to us, look, that happened, and it may have been in a different way, but it's happened traditionally 10 years ago also when they took the census, and 10 years before that. So we have to use data that actually provides some comparison. So the trend lines, for instance, are all census data. So I'm not saying that 20 or 30 years ago you had the same issues, but the undercounting issue was a similar one. It may be greater now, we don't know. It's very hard for us to get additional data. We're trying very hard, as you know, with the school. Well, I should go into the school data. We have the data now from the school district's own, study, which is done by Western Suffolk BOCES. Have that. We're going through it. We have a specialist on our team, Tina Lund, we've had conversations with the school district. We're trying to get even more data from them. And they've been we had a very good initial, Zoom meeting with the district. And Tina is going to use jointly, we hope it'll be a partnership using their data. But I want to emphasize, their own data shows that there will be, according to their data, a decline in students in the Ossining school district within the next 5 to 6 years. So that is mirroring to some extent the census data saying that you're basically a stable population, that you're not growing tremendously. Because the school district's own grade by grade projections done by their consultant are showing a decline, not a growth, but a decline in the school district enrollment figures in the next 4 to 5 years. It's still growing, still remain growing next year, the year after, but 4 to 5 years out, that starts to stabilize and go down slightly.
That's great.
Yeah.
What doesn't seem to make sense is that in the last 10 years, they've increased by 1,000 students, which is about a 20% increase overall in the school population. And it's been almost no increase in the general population. That is the data that we're able to use here. I'm just pointing it out. I realize that data is one of those things that's very difficult to get, and we are always an underrepresented, undercounted community. And the information that's there is fascinating. I just want to understand where it's coming from.
It is, yeah. And it's far from perfect, I agree. It's very, well, that's why we're trying with the school district in meetings with them, because they have good data and they can get data that can get at school children better than I think the census data.
Yeah, absolutely, because they actually do know who the students are that are showing up
They
in class,
know who the buses are
where to
picking
send
up.
the mail to. So yes, they actually have real data. It's not nobody
Yes.
needs to respond. If you enroll your
That's
kid, you've got that data. So it is good. It's a great source, at least for that part of the population. I just had a couple more things I wanted to mention. I think, Omar Lopez, thank you very much for the suggestion to keep the ideas wall up. I do understand the idea of wanting to introduce something new, because it's a new way to get people to be aware of it and draw them in. I think every time that we have another opportunity to reach out to the public and say, here, this is what we're doing. We'd like to hear from you. We're just building people's awareness that we're even doing this, or that they have a way to respond to us. And so I like the idea of if we do outreach to get people to respond to the survey, they may respond to the survey and go to the ideas wall. They may say, I don't feel like doing the survey, but I really have something important I want you to know that I really care about, and put it in the ideas wall. So I like it staying up there as long as you're able to, still have time to be able to incorporate the feedback that you're getting from that, because I realize, like, if the end date is this Friday, then you can just incorporate that and distill all that information and be done with it. But as long as you're able to keep that open and keep on track, then I like that being open as well. As far as the subcommittee meetings, thank you, Manny. I think you brought it up that I know that a few of them took place. Actually, thank you for providing that schedule. I didn't realize that some of those had taken place. And so what we've asked is for the upcoming subcommittee meetings, as they're scheduled, to provide everybody on the Board of Trustees and the steering committee for the dates and times that those are taking place, for us to be able to observe. If we'd like, yeah, Karen's nodding her head. She and I just went over this yesterday and remind us. I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that we've asked for that. It's not that we need to be there, but it just helps us, the more opportunities we have to be part of the process. So when it comes to us for approval, or my colleagues, if I'm not on the board anymore, then we kind of knew where everybody's head was at when how we got to that point. Karen, you unmuted, so you want to say something about that?
No, I just want to say that that is the case. So the board will be getting all the information, as will the steering committee members too. So as we're doing these things, and we're also going to make sure that our subcommittee members know when our steering committee's meetings are too, so that we can get as much participation as possible.
That's true.
We have some other things too that we're doing. As we're completing the the drafts from the subcommittees, they're going back to the subcommittees, then they'll go back to the steering committee. So they're going through, and then we'll be going back to the subcommittees again for additional feedback. So there is a pretty significant feedback loop built into the process.
Mayor, I would add any trustee, we would welcome any trustee who wants to attend any of these subcommittee meetings. You should feel free. Yeah, well,
Excellent.
it's a plus for us. When we get there to the public hearing, it's very important that all the trustees have, know everything that's going on and had the opportunity to attend anything you want. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And I'm not trying to put more work on the trustees, but we all do want to kind of make sure we're following along and we're able to, ask fewer of these annoying questions when we do all of these updates. But you mentioned there's one of the subcommittees is downtown. That's downtown and economic development more broadly, right? Because we do have a number of business districts is that all going to be part of the same conversation?
I actually think that we're going to probably rename that too, because we don't really have a downtown, we have a through town. So and it's really a village. So I think we're going to rename that subcommittee. But yes, it's basically.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
Basically, overall economic development, business development. So.
Excellent.
And the subcommittee doesn't even say that. The subcommittee groups doesn't say downtown actually.
One of the screens tonight did. So it sounds.
Oh,
like
I see. But
yeah. But
it's not consistent with what they have in the actual website.
Right. So we'll make sure that we tighten that up.
And I'll just say, when we talked about the zoning chapter, there were some really some important recommendations that we discussed the last time BFJ was here that I thought were really good recommendations, particularly related to the T zone. And we talked about if it's a two-family zone, let's make that as of right, but then what would be logical conditional uses for it that could go through some more scrutiny and might be consistent. It might make sense to have a 3 or 4 family property in a T zone if they're, it works with that block, or if it could be a multifamily. So I thought those were great recommendations. So those were some specific recommendations that you've sort of vetted with the steering committee and with the village board. So, I just want to acknowledge that these draft chapters do have some recommendations in it beyond just a gathering of baseline data. And then my last question is to understand the timeline, because I know we've shown us so many timelines, so many calendars, but right now this is happening faster than I was expecting. So there's a public hearing anticipated for this fall in October, November with the steering committee, and then one in February with the Board of Trustees. And then theoretically, if we stay on course for that, then there's a public hearing with the Board of Trustees in February, and then in March, they vote on it?
Well, in March, what normally happens is after the hearing, you consider, all of the comments. So we don't expect necessarily adoption in March. What's happened in most of our other communities, the trustees get together, discuss all of the comments you heard at the public hearing, decide on changes you would like to make, and then we go ahead and make those revisions and get it back to you. So it would maybe happen sometime later in the spring when you're comfortable, when the trustees are comfortable for adoption. So, but the timeline, though, in answer to your question, Mayor, has always remained the same since day one. It's just trying to keep you up to date on progress we're making on it.
I guess when we were talking about this a couple of months ago, and what a challenging time is to be doing these things, we were saying, oh, this is going to go into next year. And of course, we never know what this COVID world looks like and when we'll all be in a room together. We fully expected that we would be in a different kind of world where we would, maybe even shake hands or something dangerous like that to have some of these conversations. But I'm not so optimistic that that's going to be a reality by October, November, or even by February. So I guess that's why it was jarring to me. It suddenly seemed like things are moving fast, which is not normal for comprehensive plans. But if that's where we were, I guess it's just the whole world is hard to keep track of what a long time anymore.
Yeah, most of the ones we've done in Westchester, actually most of the ones we've done, Connecticut, Westchester, they're usually about a year. They might go a little longer, 14 months or, but what we found is if it goes too long or if it drags, people change, trustees change, forget what was said 9 months ago, let alone 2 months ago. So in other words, it makes sense to also try to stay, if you can, And there's always exceptions like COVID-19. So if you can, though, or we can, it does make sense to try to, to have deadlines, because I find having them crystallizes thinking.
For sure. I think I'm just having trouble keeping track of the fact
okay.
Earth is spinning or not spinning, so it caught me off guard. But I'm sure it's where we're supposed to be. I just didn't realize that's where we were. Okay, so I think we covered a lot, and I know we have a big agenda ahead of us. But is there anybody else who wanted to comment or ask any questions on to BFJ while they're with us? Okay. Karen, did you wanna give any final words on this, or transition us over to our friends from Westchester Power?
Well, I certainly want to thank our colleagues from BFJ. We are, the comprehensive plan is keeping us all busy, but we are finding it's a great way to touch base with so many members of the community. It's even through these difficult times, it's been a good and instructive process. So we're looking forward to having more dialogue as we go through this process, and thank them. Thank Frank and Simon for being here tonight, and Jonathan as well. And I thank Jaime for stewarding this on the staff side. So thank you for being here, and we will see you, BFJ, very soon in our internal conversations and follow up to this meeting. And next up, I would like to introduce our friends from Sustainable Westchester. So we have Carmen Santos, and we have Dan Welsh here tonight from Sustainable Westchester. And as many of you know, Sustainable Westchester, their mission is to form collaborative resources regionally through municipalities to ensure that we have access to sustainable energy sources. So we are going to, they're going to begin giving us an update of their progress this year, and making recommendations for future as well. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Carmen and Dan.
Great, and maybe Carmen, let me introduce you to everybody. I'm the director of the program. I've been around for a while, and maybe some of you have met me before. But Carmen's been with us for about half a year, and she's a tremendous find and a great contributor to the Westchester Power team. She worked in the engineering field for many years in project management and civil engineering, and then she decided she wanted to save the planet, and she found us, and that's a whole other story. But she's been a great addition, some skills, our productivity, and helping with the ever-expanding and exciting portfolio of initiatives. So she's out there working with all of our stakeholders around the county now, and I'll pass it over to her.
Thank you very much, Dan. So I'm going to share my slides. Please bear with me for a second here. Thank you. Again, thank you for having us here tonight. So for those of you who don't know what Sustainable Westchester is, I know that Karen gave you an introduction, but we are a nonprofit consortium of Westchester County local municipalities. And our mission is to facilitate sustainability programming so that we can ensure a better future. 44 of the 45 municipalities in the county participate in Sustainable Westchester, and the county itself participates in it. We are here tonight to speak about Westchester Power, but we also do other work in other areas. So in the renewable energy side, we have a community solar program where program participants can get financial benefits for supporting solar development. In the building energy side, we have a Heat Smart campaign program, so the NYSERDA Heat Smart program, where we are helping residents evaluate their homes to figure out whether their heating and cooling is efficient. And we connect them with vetted contractors and facilitate financing. In the clean transportation side, we're working with electric vehicles and securing the infrastructure to charge them. In the zero waste side, one of our biggest highlights is the Recycle Right app, which municipalities can use to upload their recycling schedules. And this helps them reduce costs and improve their waste management as more of their constituents know how to dispose of their waste. If you're interested in learning more about these programs, please let us know and we will reach out to you. So program Westchester Power is one of our biggest programs here at Sustainable Westchester. It is almost like an engine to our organization. It helps us, it has helped enable the programming I just described. Basically, what we do is aggregate residents and small businesses to buy electricity collectively. And this helps us proactively set criteria that energy companies must meet in order to supply us energy. And it helps us make a positive impact in our environment and our communities. So 27 municipalities participate in Westchester Power. 24 of them have chosen green supply that is 100% renewable energy as their default supply. And we're very happy to say that the village of Ossining has chosen green supply as their default energy. One of the biggest reasons we do this is because of the positive environmental progress we make. So program-wise, since the launch of the program, we've mitigated 660,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide, which is equivalent to 142,000 cars taken off the road for 1 year and about 11 million tree seedlings grown for 10 years. And the village of Ossining has contributed to this by helping us mitigate 35,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide, which is something around 7,400 cars taken off the road for 1 year and 57,000 tree seedlings grown for 10 years. So we have there are many benefits for the program. We're a vetted community program. We are not an ESCO. We work with ESCOs to access renewable energy, but there are no penalties or termination fees for customers. There are no surprises and rate changes. We let them know when a new rate will be introduced, as we will be doing for the 2021 contract coming up. We set a not to exceed bid cap, and this is informed by research in the energy market as well as historical pricing for utilities. And your municipality would approve of this. Our large customer base has helped us secure competitive prices for fixed rates, which buffer us from the volatility and spikes of the energy market. So if you're not with Westchester Power, you currently, and your utility currently buys your electricity, basically your monthly bills will be different, will be a different rate every time. We provide customer service to our customers via phone, via email. We are always going out into our communities to inform them about our program, clean energy. We even warn them against predatory practices of ESCOs. Sometimes they like to set clients with a contract where they have a low introductory rate and all of a sudden their rate increases. We help customers know about how to read their bill, and we provide all this information also in Spanish. So again, our biggest reason for doing this is mitigating climate change. As you've all experienced and seen, our winter was very mild. We rarely saw any snow, and so the goals for climate action are more aggressive now. The New York State climate goals are something that is we have to try to meet, and by participating in this program, you are helping offset hundreds of metric tons of carbon dioxide. Also, by participating in this program, you have access to clean energy community certifications and some grants that are available for you. And also, thanks to your participation in this program, we now have a seat at the table in the energy space. We are now communicating with supply companies. We're asking for renewable energy. We're asking for rates. Basically, we're getting more choice in the energy side, and we're trying to secure better future. So right now, we want to go into financial performance of the Village of Ossining. First, we want to say that since the start of our last contract, which started in 2019, we have been behind the utility rates. However, throughout the life of the program, we have been ahead in that we have saved money by participating with this program. So you currently have green supply as your default supply, which is about $7.96 per kilowatt hour, and it is 100% renewable energy. And the utility that we're
7.96 cents, not dollars.
Oh, 90, I'm sorry, 96 cents. And the rates that we are comparing in terms of the utility, they're not 100% renewable energy. They're a fraction, probably the bare minimum that is currently required. So just to give you an understanding about the energy space and the clean energy space, we did some research for the village of Ossining, and for the same term period for 24 months, you find that one of the lowest rates available is about 10 cents more than what we are providing, and that's for 100% renewable energy. So really, all in all, Westchester Power has helped us secure a affordable clean energy rate. So as I mentioned, during contract 2, which started in 2019, we came behind about $500,000. But for the life of the program, we have saved about $267,000, and which has helped us avoid 35,000 tons of carbon dioxide. So a lot of people like to look at these numbers more on a monthly per account basis. So for the green residential accounts, for contract 2, we've been behind about $6. And since the launch of the program, we've been ahead about $1.50. And for the green commercial accounts, we've been behind about $5. And since the launch of the program, we've been also behind around $3. But again, we just want to emphasize that we have one of the lowest rates available for clean energy. We've saved for the village of Ossining $267,000. And the biggest impact of all, we've helped mitigate 35,000 tons of carbon dioxide. So our program is also a foundation for other programs, and one of our programs that has been enabled by Westchester Power is our community solar program. And basically with this program, you can participate in this program whether you're in Westchester Power or not. And basically you buy renewable energy credits from a solar project, which are then applied to your electricity bill. And the credits you buy, they're at a discounted price. And so in the end, it ends up saving you money. Moving forward, we are hoping that we can integrate community solar in an opt-out basis in Westchester Power, making these savings available to all of our Westchester Power customers. This is possible because the DPS has allowed programs such as Westchester Power to enroll customers on an opt-out basis, as well as they've asked utilities to create consolidated billing. That means instead of you buying credits from a solar developer and also then paying your electricity bill, you would only pay your electricity bill. That is one bill, and that's all you would do to participate in this program. So we're very excited about this, and we hope to start first with low-income customers, as we see these customers are typically not included as much within the energy, the clean energy rewards that are happening now. And in addition to this, Westchester Power is like a launch pad to more programming. We are testing programs, we're testing technology. We currently have a pilot program called Residential Demand Response Program, where customers get financial payments for reducing their energy use during peak hours. And we're also in communications with companies that can help us bring renewable energy directly to Westchester County. Currently, we're participating in the clean energy space by buying renewable energy credits from New York State and matching that to our use from our local grid. So with direct supply, we'd basically be channeling renewable energy to our local grid and using it. We're also testing pilot technologies within our facility. Right now, we're trying to channel energy from solar panels on a roof towards an innovative energy battery storage that would then charge electric vehicles. We're also looking into geothermal for our facility. So our hope in doing this is to be green, but also to expand this towards the rest of our community. So I just want to say that all of this is possible because of your participation in Westchester Power. Our large customer base has helped us ensure that we have this opportunity. And now we are coming to you once again in hopes that you can continue to participate in the program and continue to help us create more sustainability programming. So to take you back, our first contract started in 2016, then the second contract started in 2019, and now in 2021, we would be starting the third contract. We would have the same contract goals as 2 supply rates, a basic supply, a green supply. Fixed rates, we would set a not to exceed bid price that your municipality would agree on, and we would remain committed to New York State renewable energy credits. So our hope is that in August, the municipalities that choose to participate in Westchester Power would sign a memorandum of understanding, and which outlines the criteria that energy companies have to meet in order to win the bid. And so in early September, we would then be sending out the request for proposals, and we would award the winning bidder the contract, sign the contract, and we'd continue to do outreach. And in early November, we would send notification letters to customers, informing them of the winning bidder, the rate, and what is their default supply, how to opt out of the program if they choose to opt out, or also how to change from supply if they would like to change from their default supply to the other option. And beginning January 1st on their meter read date, they would be enrolled within our program. And by the way, any customer can choose to opt out at any point. This is all pushing choice for everyone. So they can do that at any point, sorry. And we are going to continue to do outreach. We've been doing outreach via virtual platforms right now because of the COVID situation. And really, if you want us to go to any of your community groups, we would be happy to do so, try to set up something with virtual platform right now. So we can do that for you. And we want to just say thank you very much for listening to this presentation, and we really hope that you consider your continuing in Westchester Power.
Carmen, thank you so much. Oh, good. Thank you for putting it back so we can all see each other. Now, usually I open it up to questions and comments from my colleagues, but I do want to jump in and give a little bit of a little bit of perspective. We have a couple of newer trustees on the board. Nice. Okay. And Dan, it's great to see you. Dan and I actually
colleagues from the NWIAC days, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I'll give like the 10-second thumbnail of Ossining's history and getting to this point. Ossining was a charter member in NWIAC, which was the Northern Westchester Energy Action Consortium. At that time, Dan was a council member in Lewisboro. I joined the NWIAC board when I became a trustee in the village of Ossining. And then all of us on the NWIAC board joined with the SWIAC board members, which is the southern version that followed our lead. And then together every other Friday for at least a year, we met and in a steering committee and found and created Sustainable Westchester. And I'm thrilled to see, and I'm going to out them. Buchanan is the one municipality that is not a member. You got Portchester since the last time I saw the map, so good job. They were the last holdout. So Buchanan, which is ironic since we're talking about renewable energy, but that does also bring me to the one real question I have. If you said it, I missed it in the presentation, Carmen. What is the breakdown of the renewable energy sources? And does it include nuclear? Is it all hydro, solar, and wind? And then how does that break down?
So right now we have New York State renewable energy credits for hydropower.
Oh, so it's all
100%. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Great. Then I'll just give another pat on the back to the Village of Ossining. We were one of the initial CCA members, and we've been green since the beginning. The little bumps in the road that we had initially had not to do so much with the program, but with the communication. People were a little taken aback and felt that this must be some sort of scam because they were suddenly shifted in. They didn't ask to be part of this renewable energy program or whatever this was. And it is always difficult getting information out to people. This is not the simplest concept for any of us who sit around and talk about it all the time. So for people who don't, attend all of these meetings, it was difficult. But now we're, 5 years into it for the CCA. And I think I'm excited that you're here and hopeful that my colleagues are able to have any of their questions addressed so we can continue this great relationship. And with that, I will open it up to questions and comments from anyone on the Village Board.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Carmen. So remind me, please, again, what is the range of the pricing that we're looking for, that we gain into right now, and what is that we are paying right now? What is the current number that we have?
The current number was the 7.96 cents for green power. And I think I need a clarification on what you mean by range.
The range that we are, obviously we go into a new contract. You guys are going to be sourcing it out to someone new. What is the average that you've seen right now?
So I think where we're going is to talk about like the process for getting the criteria for the next contract. And in normal years, we have used the trailing average as a benchmark for ourselves. But since the Con Ed prices went down to historic lows, we can't expect to go out and get prices from people that are going to beat the historic low. So what we just did in the NYSEG territory is we collected indicative pricing from the market and looked at where the futures market was going and came up with a number that everybody was comfortable with. And we do that. We call all the chief electeds and the administrators into a meeting to hash that out. But we're also going to add one more thing to the mix this year, which we're really excited about, which we just signed up with the other day, which is a reverse auction service. So these folks are going to do hand-holding basically through the whole RFI. Normally we do we mail out an RFI, a request for information, we get the bidders together, then we mail out an RFP. But this is going to take it all online, give us access to more bidders, and is actually going to be an online platform where we can give anybody who's interested here log-ons, and you'll see the bidders bidding it down. So we got to come up with, we want always want a price not to exceed. So we go into the bid knowing, we're not committing to just any price, but we're very confident that the bidding process is going to bring it down to wherever the best place in the market is with that. Now it is, as I say, we're coming out of historic lows and the futures are going up, and the goal is to capture as much of the low position that we're in now so that on the average over time, we're going to benefit from it.
No, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. And I guess, this question always comes up again. So people who do not qualify for this program is the people that have solar panels, correct?
No, actually, solar panels would be consistent with being in the program, because if you have solar panels yourself, it basically just reduces the amount that you're buying from the grid, right? it reduces your demand. And all it means is if you're in the program, whatever's left that you're buying through the program.
It's the ESCOs. It's people with ESCOs that are not automatically part of it.
Correct. So there are a couple of, that's exactly right. So if people are already with ESCOs, then, you know, they're not getting the notice letter. They're not in the program. They're not getting the notice letter because the utility doesn't give us that information. We don't have that information. And if they wanted to be in, they'd have to exit and then they could opt in. Or if they exit and go back to the utility, they become, in the next quarter, on a quarterly basis, we get from the utility what they call a newly eligible customer list. So these are people who haven't opted out before, but they are, maybe they moved into the neighborhood, for example, and they're a new account. So they would eventually get the mailing from the program.
I mean, me personally, I've gone through this twice before, and I don't see a downside on this. It's always been a positive feedback. I mean, this obviously that in the beginning, I think we got a lot of angry emails and be like, "What are you guys doing?" You know, we didn't.
Libertarians.
You know, but it was understandable, and I think it was a lot of that. It was you know, communication and how do we do that? You know, how do we go back and tell them this is something that is good for us, right, you know, as a whole, as a community. So I'm comfortable with moving forward with this again, but I would like to hear it for the rest of my colleagues as well. So, but great. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Super helpful. This is my first rodeo. So a lot of it is pretty clear and straightforward and reasons to want to move forward. The biggest question that I have is, can you speak to, because we have now, this is both kind of the municipality and also there are individuals that are taking advantage of this program. Door-to-door energy salespeople, can you talk to that and how that mixes into all of this?
So I will say that that's one of we feel is our duties and obligations, is to try and help educate people about the energy market. And we tend to get that information or those little news bits pretty early. People call the towns and the towns call us and say, my gosh, somebody just knocked on somebody's door and said, you got to quick sign up or your power is going to get cut off, you know, and we get that kind of stuff. And we usually send out a memo saying, hey, you know, watch out for this type of thing. If we have any identifying information, we'll send it up to the Public Service Commission and try to have them track it down. So whether it's door to door or some of the mailings are also can be less than, you know, honest. And so we try to help with that. We hold workshops on occasion. A lot of times we like to have them in senior centers because they can be the biggest targets of these type of approaches. And so we do read your bill workshops, which is really important because a lot of times people get slammed, as they call it, and signed up without them even knowing. Or maybe they signed up like a year ago because they had a teaser rate and then they didn't bother looking at their bill. And so we tell them, you got to look here. This is the number. And you can see whether you have an ESCO. And if it's like 15 cents or something, you know, talk to us. We'll figure out where you're at. And so that's a big piece of what we try to help out with.
Thank you. That's super helpful. That's a lot.
Please refer to us and we'll try to help.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I'd just like to go back to where you referenced people that do have solar. And for people that are watching, maybe make it more clear to them the understanding that your household uses 1,000 kilowatts and you produce 750 solar, that this sustainable energy is going to come out of the 250 that's left over, right? That you're drawing off the grid.
Exactly.
Right. That way, I just want people to understand that because it can be very confusing, especially when you're reading your bills.
It absolutely can. And if you're one of those households that can't, put solar on your own place, or you're in a multi-family situation, you have shade on your house, or the roof won't hold it, and you want to participate in the community solar program that's out there, that's a remote situation where you subscribe and you end up getting the financial benefit, and you're helping to put new renewables on the grid. But that's compatible also, because it actually occurs all as a credit on your bill and doesn't touch the kilowatt hours at all. So all these programs can exist together, but because there are a number of them and they sound kind of similar, it is admittedly a little bewildering for people. So that's, part of, again, why we try to run these workshops and help people through it. And we're available, for on the phone or whatever to help people sort it out. But a lot of opportunities.
So for example, if there's the village has a piece of property and we put a solar farm on this property, and this solar farm is pushing back into the grid, whatever it may be, and the people, if I'm understanding you right, they sign up to be a part of what the village is producing. That's how that would work, but you wouldn't see it effectively in your bill. You would just see a credit.
That's right. You won't see it. It won't be like kilowatt hours. It won't be like the supplier. It shows up only as a credit.
Yeah, it'll just be another line item.
That's right.
The bill. Okay.
The way it works today is you have to proactively sign up.
Right.
Get that credit. Say it's $100 credit, and you pay $90 for that credit. So you net out $10 savings.
Right.
You have that transaction going on. So what Carmen described is this future next year, when the utilities have consolidated billing available, all that netting out is done on your bill. So you just get that $10 credit on the bill.
Right.
And then we're in the position to go to solar developers and say, bring us what you got. As long as you can meet our 10% discount, we'll shovel it in. And we see that taking the first opportunities and trying to distribute them first to the low-income customers. We think we should be able to deliver benefits to those customers who have been sort of cut out of a lot of the benefits of the new energy economy, and bring them something that's really impactful. So that's exciting to us.
All right, thank you. Very Carmen, thank you very much. Very informational. And looking forward to working in the future with you.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic. We'll be in touch about the MOU and all that in the next steps.
Okay, I'm not, Rika, are you here? I'm not seeing Rika. So,
she's been off for a little while. Something must have happened.
Oh, she's raising her hand. Jaime, I don't know if there's if she needs some help.
There
Technological.
she is. She's back.
I'm sorry, I didn't see she was off. She's back.
Rika, did you want to ask any questions or comments?
Yeah, I've been on the whole
friends
time.
in
No, I
Westchester
think
Power?
everybody, thanks for bringing it up. I've been on the whole time. If it makes you feel better, I'm having Verizon come out next week. We're having little problems in our household. I got knocked off. Anyway, Bob, thank you for bringing up that piece. That was something I had wanted to talk about. I myself, my husband was very involved. I think that's when you, Victoria, met him actually through NICE. So we have solar panels, which I talk about every opportunity because it's worked out really well. Really happy to hear about the community piece. I think you guys are doing great work. I really appreciate this annual update that we get, and I'm really interested in what Bob was talking about as well, which is putting up. I'm not interested in putting up solar farms, not what I'm talking about, but in seeing how we might participate in helping folks with this expense that we all have every month. So thanks for a really informative presentation. Appreciate it.
Did the village submit information about potential sites to the NIPA program that Nina's running? So that's great. I mean, that's when that'll going to take a little time to bring it all together, but from all reports, what they've done with the county has been great, and we can look forward to some real good discounts, and through that, then we can run campaigns in the village and try to make sure that we are sending these credits where they're going to have the most impact.
Great.
When was the last time you guys did a presentation in Ossining? Sorry, Victoria. I thought I was done too. When was the last time you did an actual presentation here?
Probably a year ago.
A year ago?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So we might want to just think,
yeah, I think we
as
want
new
to
stuff is going on, keep us in mind. I mean, Zoom is actually a pretty good way to do it too.
yeah.
You know,
So we're
even if we
happy to
can't do in person.
We're happy to do like a separate community session. We've been doing sort of lunchtime sessions as well. That
Very nice.
It can work for people. So we'll set something up and we'll maybe ask you guys to help advertise it and then
Sure.
for anybody to drop in and learn more about the program.
Yeah, I think that'll be really helpful. Thank you so much for your time.
So I just want to, we've got a lot of things that we've been talking about here, and I just want to clarify the action that we're being asked to take, if not right now, in the very near future, is for the village to opt to continue being part of the CCA, the Community Choice Aggregation Program, with of 100% renewable energy, which is what we've had now for a few years. And I think all I'm hearing is everybody says, yay, let's move forward with whatever needs to happen from a procedural perspective on that. And then for all of us who are trying to do everything we can to make smart, thoughtful choices, which can also often be financially beneficial, there are layers of what you can do. I know Rika and I both have solar on our house, and that does cover most of my electrical use. Then the gap between that, I actually have an ESCO just because I had it from before we started this and I never called and changed it. So I should probably be one of those people who calls you up and says, hey, can you help me make sure that I'm doing the right thing here and I'm saving money and what is this energy that I signed up for? So I should call you just as like homeowner electric bill payer person, and you can give me some advice. But then on top of that, this community solar program that we're talking about, even if the village has, we sent in all of our properties that we have control over to the NIPA program and are very, very interested in seeing what can happen. And there's more robust options now for municipal solar than ever before. And I know we've been trying for years to get New York State to allow this to be possible with even as NIPA customers without the systems benefits charge. And it's been a multi-layer, lots of hoops to jump through. And then we had a meeting and then like a week later, the world shut down. But we did put in our properties, and it'd be great if we can get some solar on our buildings, or now they have carports is an option that really wasn't a viable option not so long ago. We might have some open space where it makes sense on village property. But even before any of that happens, anyone can become part of the municipal solar program and get credits. They can do that right now. That was something we could layer on top of that. Is that available right now through Sustainable Westchester?
It is. There's a finite amount of seats left at this point because it comes project by project. So I'd recommend, if that's something somebody's really excited about, to go up on the Sustainable Westchester site, just pick the solar item out of the initiatives and it'll send you right there. And so it comes and goes. And frankly, there's a whole lot of capacity in an ISEG territory, but there's less in Con Ed. We're speaking to developers right now. We had a discussion with one the other day that was very exciting about a whole lot of megawatts that'll be available. And again, we're hoping to deliver to some seats there now if people are interested in signing up.
And then if any of these projects that we are potentially could consider here in the village of Ossining, that if they were to move forward, then that would expand the pool of seats available for people to be able to take advantage of these community solar credits. Okay, thanks.
Right.
I understand that.
Decide where you wanted to go with those credits.
Okay. All right. I have to say, this is at least my third conversation in the last year about this, and there have been various conversations for many years. So if you didn't follow it, that's okay, because I think we're all on the same page for Westchester Power CCA, 100% renewable, and thank you very much. Does anybody have any final comments or questions, or just thank yous? Great. Anything else we need to know, Dan or Carmen?
Right now, no. I just look out for our messaging on the MOU and just our meetings with the joint electeds.
And there's a ton of exciting stuff. Like our new colleague Seth Lightman has been really stirring the pot on electric vehicles.
Yes.
And I'm in love with the electric school bus stuff he's doing, where from what I understand, the construct that he's got may allow the schools to go forward with this being net neutral relative to their budgets. And that's a breakthrough point that we had not seen before, you know. So you're going to hear a lot of exciting stuff. Carmen mentioned the demand response. This is the first in New York State and, you know, near the first in the country, I think, time that residential customers have been able to participate in demand response, where you agree to, you know, kick your thermostat up or cut off some load at certain peak times of the year, and you get paid for that. Con Ed has some programs like this, but we're tapping directly into the New York ISO programs with this that used to only be available to commercial entities. So, you know, it's hard to keep up with. There's so much movement and so much exciting stuff. So you're going to hear more about it. Great.
Thank you. That is exciting. Electric school buses will make a big difference in our community, where we have lots of school buses because we have a half a dozen buildings. So that would be really something that I'd love to see happen here in Ossining.
There you go.
A lot of pollution comes from those school buses. So thank you so much. This was really valuable conversation, and I look forward to the next one.
Thank you.
Okay, guys. Great to see you. We'll be in touch.
Thank you
Bye,
so
Dan.
much.
All right. Take care
All
now.
right. Great. So Karen, next up.
Okay, next up is a discussion of what is required of the Village of Ossining under Executive Order 203, the New York State Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative. So with that, I will turn it over to the board.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Chief Sylvester has joined us for this part of the conversation. And several of us participated in the conversation earlier today, as well as a conversation yesterday in preparation for this. So we could have some idea of what we're recommending for next steps. And I know that we have a few people that have tuned in to watch, including members of the CPCRB, who are obviously the Civilian Police Complaint Review Board, obviously one of the important stakeholders in this process. So I'll just give a very brief thumbnail for anybody tuning in now and wondering what Executive Order 203 is, and I'm sure others can clarify or highlight what that means. As far as if I missed something, a couple of weeks ago, the governor came down with a mandate for every municipality that has a law enforcement agency to do a comprehensive review of law enforcement policies and come up with a plan that would need to be ratified by the elected body by next April 1st. So you're leaning forward. Do you want to tell me, do you want to correct me on something yet? Okay. Okay. So working backwards, what we figured out is that we really need to have a plan ready for the public to review by the end of this year, so that that gives us enough time to get more final feedback from the public, and then put out a final plan for the board to ratify sometime in March. So that leaves us less than 5 months by the end of to do all of our stakeholder meetings, get all of our feedback from the community, and put together a plan. We are fortunately in a much, much better position than a lot of communities in New York State and in the country. I think if every community had the relationship that we do with our police department and had a police department like ours, we wouldn't have gotten this executive order. We already have a Civilian Police Complaint Review Board. Is there something more that can be done to help make that more robust or effective? Maybe that's something we can look at, but there are some specific policies and initiatives that need to be reviewed and understood, and how they are handled in our community now. That's part of the conversations we'll be having. And so what we talked about today, we spoke to an organization, it doesn't really matter which one it is, but it's Pattern for Progress, which is one of the consulting firms that has done some work in Ossining before. And these are not the law enforcement experts. The law enforcement experts are our police department, and there's certainly more that we can tap into. But what we're looking for is who can help facilitate community engagement sessions so that we can bring together stakeholders, someone can ask important questions, facilitate the conversation, take in all that information that they're hearing, and help to actually write and generate the plan with all of us, pretty much everybody's on the screen right now, and then some, to be able to have a plan that really reflects who we are as a community, who our police department is, and what our community is telling us. So that's where we are in a very high level comment, and I'd like to hear from anybody else who is on the call today, if you want to give a little more definition on what you think would be next steps to bring the rest of the trustees up to speed. So Trustee Lopez, you want to chime in?
Yes, so one of the, this has a few different pieces to it. So the first is starting with the all of the, it's hard to even find the language, honestly, because it's one of these very difficult situations where really, I want to say that starting with the murder of George Floyd, arguably much before that, but really what incited a lot of this was the murder of George Floyd. We have seen throughout the country many demonstrations against police brutality, and a lot of that has culminated in wanting to take a look at reimagining policing. Now, the complicated part of it is that there are large cities and cities that have a history of problematic police behavior that reimagining and completely reforming the police makes a lot of sense. So you take a place like Camden, for example. A few years ago, I think it was 2017, they actually completely reformatted their entire police department. They reimagined it. And that has had some mixed results, but so definitely some positives. Ossining is not Camden, and it is not many of these places. Ossining is a community that where we've had Chief Sylvester for 17 years in total, not as chief, but in our community, and serving as chief for the last handful of years. And in that time has really led a lot of the effort to, and before a lot of these demonstrations, to bring Ossining up to speed to 21st century policing, community policing, going through bias training, body cameras, a lot of different kinds of reforms. And so when we're at this moment where the governor has called for municipalities across the state to submit plans for how they are going to address issues with policing in their community and do so in a way that is responding to the local need. What does that look like in a community like Ossining, given our demographics, given our history, but also given our police department, which nothing is perfect, of course, but is in a place where, if you compare it to a lot of other departments across the country, is already doing a very strong job. At the same time, you can't frame the conversation as, look at all the great things that we are doing. The point is, let's identify the places where we can improve. And so leading this conversation in a way that is sensitive to the really complicated and personal nature of this issue, to people in this community in general, people of color specifically, and Black people in this community even more specifically, incorporating their feedback into whatever it is that we're looking to do is absolutely critical. And so we wanted to be sensitive to framing this conversation and leading this conversation in a way that would, from the front end, be able to mitigate any thoughts that people may have that their complaints were falling upon deaf ears or that they weren't being taken seriously. And so that is ultimately what led us to look at different options for who might lead this conversation. We've had one conversation thus far previous to this meeting today. We will ultimately have more, but really the timeline is such that we have to move pretty quickly because although we have until, I think it's April of next year to ultimately submit a plan that is approved by the Board of Trustees, what that means is we're really looking to do it by the end of the calendar year. November and December, because of the budget, because of various things, the holidays, everything else are really out. And so you start to see the constraints in time. So we want to get moving quickly. That is ultimately what is leading to this conversation. There's a kind of a thread of this, given the moment that we are in, of what enforcement looks like given COVID, that I think we should discuss as well. But the larger conversation is about what evolving police, whatever the word is that we want to use, but how can we take our police department from where it is to where it can be, considering the progress that we've already made. So that's a little bit of introduction, given my understanding.
I just expected somebody else would unmute themselves, and I was waiting to hear who wanted to chime in next, because we're at a point right now where we're not going to undergo an official RFP process, but what we need to do is figure out the basic parameters and terms that we would want to have in, because we did come to the conclusion, just to bring everybody up to speed, we had a Board of Trustees, what would normally be our monthly dinner meeting. We did at 11 o'clock yesterday morning, where we talked about this and a couple of other things, so that we could be prepared for tonight and have some sense of what we wanted to do. And we all came to the conclusion that it would be really helpful to have somebody who's a professional facilitator for these kind of community conversations to be brought on board. So what we have to figure out now, and hopefully our conversation today, and Karen and the chief and Stuart were part of that as well, is to get some clarity on what we're asked, what we're expecting to get out of this consultant, so that we know what we're asking for. We're going to get what we think we need, and we're going to be able to make that happen in a relatively swift order. Rika, you're unmuted. Does that mean you're going to chime in now?
No, I just, no, I was waiting for the right moment. I just wanted to make it clear we sometimes get complaints, in addition to what Omar said. And again, I don't need to hear myself talk and repeat what's already been said, so I'll say I echo his words. But in addition, I want the public to understand in this time of sort of economic strife why we felt we needed a third party. It's not a judgmental thing about whether we can do it ourselves or we can't do it, or my point of view is very pragmatic and very simple. The village manager's plate is full. We are working on many things right now. The village staff, I should say, is working. There are about a dozen initiatives that are pretty major. We've got the Youth Bureau. We've got all these COVID-19 changes that are occurring every day and every week. Will school start? Will it start late? Will this happen? The parks, the outdoor dining. There was so much that was planned, and an aggressive plan that the village manager and her staff are working on, that our corporation council is working on. And on top of this, a very, I think, a good thing that the governor has done by putting this mandate together, but 5 months is nothing. We say April 1 is like not really April, because that's when it's due. We have to vote on it before that. We need public engagement in it, and for everything that Omar said. So sometimes to get something moving, you want somebody focused on it. So I wanted to just explain that part of it a little bit more clearly, that it is such an important project and initiative for us that without the judgments of anybody's ability or whether we can do it ourselves or not, of course we can do it ourselves. Of course we can find people on staff. Of course the chief could do it if he wanted to with his staff. But I think it makes much more sense that we take it exactly as seriously as it should be, and that a third party would simply move it along the timeline in a much more efficient way, and in a way that I think will allow people to all come together at the right points in time and would be able to manage it. So I'm being very pragmatic on it from that point of view, in addition to what was said before. But I do want the public to hear it, because the public has heard from me and will continue to hear about how we have to try to save as much money as we can, because we're going into a very unstable economic time. We've already entered it. Every day there's an announcement of new bankruptcy declarations of major American corporations, and layoffs in our community, and terminations and furloughs. So I feel it necessary during these kind of times to make it clear why we would go out and seek a third party to manage this, and the importance of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rika and Omar. I guess as a point of clarification, I would like to hear this from anybody that was willing to answer, I guess. And I don't have a problem, and I'm in favor of hiring someone to kind of guide and help us with this. But I think my perspective on this is because the person that, or the consultants that we may be hiring, obviously, is an unbiased group of people that, you know, definitely, you know, is going to be gathering information. I think part of the mandate is to look at the guidelines of what the police department has on place now. So to me was a little bit more like, a 51, maybe like a 60% of the work to be done by our police chief, and the 40% will be done by this consultant, which is pretty much more gathering information, gathering, talking to people, getting all that stuff done. Is that what we're thinking? Because again, there's a lot of pieces that have to do with enforcement. It has to do with policing. So I just want to kind of have that clarification. And obviously, as a group of people, and I don't know if this will be appropriate or not, but as we gather and talk to people in the community or different groups, are we thinking about talking to the PBA? Is it the PBA wants to be involved in this whole process besides the chief? Because I'm sure there's, if you want to improve our department, we want to make sure that we are hearing all the voices. We want to make sure that we are hearing everybody that is there. Maybe the PBA has some issues with themselves that they would like to improve, or they would want to change some things in here and there. So I just want to kind of get a very clear picture on how we are approaching this and what are we expecting for this consultant to do. So that's kind of a little bit, and as much as we said there's a lot of stuff going on in our staff's plate, but I think a lot of it's like if I wanted to on the building department, sure, if I wanted to have the building inspector do some work, I expect him to be part of the consultant process, because he's the expert. He's the person who's going to be doing all the work at the end of the day when everything is done. So I want to make sure that I'm understanding what the board wants, obviously, and what we're going to end up doing at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead.
Sorry, just quickly respond, and I should be saying the exact same thing. The executive order does call for including the membership and leadership of the local police force. That's in addition to the head of the local police agency. So that's already part of the executive order. And when it comes to your first question of the ratio of responsibility, so what the executive order calls for is for the chief executive of the local government, which in this case would be Karen. Yeah?
No.
That would be you? That would be the mayor?
Yeah, it would be the mayor. In our case, it would be the village board. Yes, we are the leaders of the government.
Great. Okay, great. So it calls for us to convene the head of the local police agency and stakeholders from the community to develop a plan, which shall consider evidence-based policing strategies. Now, the reality is that, and then it lists a lot of these evidence-based policing strategies. Some of these will look very familiar because we have them, some of them less so. But so engage, the head of the police agency is already a key part of this process, and we'll be providing that information, whether it's the board convening these conversations or whether we have a third party do it. So I don't think that there would be a difference in terms of the ratio of the work that would be done by the police, whether we are leading the conversation or someone else is, because we wouldn't be pulling that information regardless.
Okay, so the one other thing that I'll add to that is something that was made clear today in our conversation was the importance of probably even before having some of the public stakeholder meetings or whatever the timeline is that makes sense, but is to have the facilitator who is not an expert in law enforcement to have meetings with the chief and with members of the police department, and they'll probably also solicit some additional outside law enforcement knowledge, because that's not the area of expertise of probably anybody that would be hiring to be doing this consulting work. You know, we've talked a lot about the police department, and right in the middle of the screen is Chief Sylvester, and he was in our conversation earlier today. So Chief, do you want to comment on anything that you've heard or how you envision how the police department would be part of this role, part of this process?
Sure. You know, I'm going to reiterate the things I've already said to the board, but since we're in a public meeting, I'll share it with the public and whoever's watching. I'm not the police department, and a lot of the conversation seems to be focused on what I would be responsible for, what I do. I'm proud to be the representative in the face of 57 or 56 of the finest law enforcement professionals in New York State. This isn't about what I do. I get to play a role where I put a good face on the outstanding work that these people do every single day. We've talked about consultants, and we need people that have an education background and a law enforcement background. So for those that don't know me or don't know my background, I've been teaching at the undergraduate level for a number of years now, state and local governments and criminal justice courses, in addition to my 17 years of law enforcement, and I have a law degree. So I cover all of the things you're looking for in those. And I share that to say this. My vision is that the governor specifically issued this. And first off, I'm going to say that this was issued in large part to deal with issues in New York City. As you've aptly stated a number of times, that most of these issues don't apply to Ossining because we've gotten ahead of these things. Body cameras have been around for 7 or 8 years now. Civilian Complaint Review Board for longer than my career. Sure, we can do lots of things better. And if you ask any person that works in this building, if there's one thing I'm known for, it's for pushing the pace. But if there's one thing the cops here are known for, it's for accepting that challenge and taking it to the next level. So I see this as a challenge, an opportunity. It's a chance for us to do new things and to engage new people to ensure that we're giving the best service. But more importantly, the underlying theme of this entire project is to build trust between, not just build trust in the community. It's to build trust between the community and the police officers. And if we want to build that trust, that requires buy-in from the cops, ownership by the cops, just as well as ownership and buy-in from the community. And the best way to do that is to allow the police department to run this and show what we're capable of doing. Now, there's a lot of concern that that a third party provides some oversight. First off, a third party right away is sending the message that this is divided, that we need somebody between us because we need somebody to bring us together, when in fact that's not the case. If anybody's been to any of my outreach events, if you've been to a block party and you've seen 500 people on the block having hamburgers with us, we don't have an issue with bringing people together. There's not a corner of this community that our police officers aren't comfortable in. So we're not necessarily, we have absolutely no concern about handling this project. In terms of staff, sure, we're spread thin. And with every new initiative that the legislature hands down, it spreads us that much thinner. We'll handle it. Why? Because this is what's important for our police department. So, I've heard a lot about hiring consultants. It sort of seems to just get past that and go back to the consultant stuff after I've begged and pleaded to allow the police department to take this challenge on, which I think is a unique request from a police department. Most of the police departments would be glad to just turn their head and let somebody else handle this. I'm suggesting that my staff, incredible people here, educated people, good cops that are up for the challenge, should be given the opportunity to take this on. And if the board finds that they're not doing their job, then you can always go hire your consultant and do this. There's an opportunity. The objective third party should be the board. That's who convenes us. So that's my request. That said, the board's made pretty clear what its intention is, and you're elected to make those decisions. So I stand ready, the police department with me, to get this done.
Okay. So this is exactly how the police department will be involved is something that we're still figuring out. But the reality is they have to be involved. We're responsible for convening the police department in the community. And what we're suggesting right now is to figure out bringing in a facilitator to organize the meetings, hear all the information, bring the information together, distill it into a plan that can then be shared with the community and get community feedback. And that is a task that needs to be done in short order. And it's a skill, and it's a skill set that we're looking to go out and hire. And it's going to be essential. It's absolutely essential for whoever we bring in as a consultant to facilitate these meetings to be working not just with us on the board, but with the chief and the Ossining Police Department. So the sooner we're able to get somebody on board, the better we're going to be able to involve all of the stakeholders in some really productive meetings. And so what I'm hoping we can clarify tonight is, we did speak with one consultant today who is familiar with Ossining and has some experience working with law enforcement, but I think we need to be clear so we can get some worthwhile proposals of what our expectations are of the facilitator. Bob, you're unmuted. Did you want to comment?
Clarify something? Earlier today, that gentleman said that he had 5 years in law enforcement. He was not a police officer. He had a job in policy in the mayor's office in New York City. That's not a job in law enforcement.
I understand. I heard that. I heard that too.
I guess my question is, the consultant part of this whole puzzle, is this, I'm trying to understand, are we relying on this person? Or is this a third set of eyes that's going to look at what the chief's going to bring, what the stakeholders out there are going to bring, and then put it all into one little neat package? Or are we going to put a package together and he's going to look at it? Because I'm really having a hard time understanding the consultant's part of this whole thing. Are we relying on this person? I don't want to rely on this person. I'll be honest with you. I just think that, I get it. I understand both sides of the argument. I'm not a 51-49 like someone was. I'm a 50-50 right now. And I understand the chief's point of view, totally understand it. And I'm trying to understand the pieces of the puzzle and we ultimately make the decision. We see what gets put in front of us with this new plan. I believe that the police department and the PBA is a huge, huge stakeholder in this, because they're the guys that are on the street every day. They're the guys that are out there dealing with this every day. We're just sitting here going, oh, we're just going to hire a consultant. I get it.
Okay,
but
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I thought you were done.
Now, so I just want to understand, what is the bottom line with this consultant? Is this, he's going to come down and say, well, this should be this, A, B, C, and D. And we're going to go, okay, we're going to go in lockstep with that, or we're going to overlook it, and we might not even consider what he tells us.
Okay, so I'm gonna throw it to Karen in a second. I just want to clarify, the consultant would be hired by us to facilitate meetings and help coordinate information and public engagement. But Karen, you speak very articulately about this. And I think we've all had negative experience with consultants sometimes, but they can be a very positive experience.
Based on the conversation that we had today with Pattern for Progress, this consultancy function would not be to dictate a policy. The policies would come from the police department. They would come from working with the people who are right here involved in those decisions. This is the way it was positioned is about engaging the community in a discussion. And while I think that we have a lot of capacity internally to do work. The actual work of engaging the community, of community engagement it's a time-consuming process. And the value that we have potentially with somebody who's a third party is they can facilitate that engagement. They can, so that's creating the meetings, what the meetings look like, using tools for community engagement, not too dissimilar to what we're doing for the comprehensive plan or other things that we're doing that involve community engagement. So just the role of coordinating that is you know, it's a substantial amount of work. The value of having a third party do it is not to undermine anybody else's ability to reach the community or implying that any of us don't have touch to the community. It's just being able to do that maybe more efficiently and more effectively. And also making sure that there's a level of comfort. Oftentimes, consultants are used to get information from people when they may not be comfortable saying things in different forums too. It's a good way to get information if people feel that there's an objective entity. And sometimes when we're talking about policing or anything that has to do with government, but particularly policing these days, there is an emotionality to it. So there would be a potential to diffuse some of that. I think that would be the value, but this is really would be a facilitator. They could distill the information that then would be used by the police department to enhance their policy work and what they're already doing. I don't see this, the way it was presented, the way I understand it, and the way I understand the expertise of the consultants we spoke to today. They are not police law enforcement policy experts. It would be more about convening dialogue.
Okay, so I think we should simplify what we're looking for here, because we've had this conversation tonight and yesterday, and there is a consensus among the elected officials that we do want somebody to facilitate this conversation. So what's clear to me is we want somebody to come in, facilitate this conversation. Exactly what that looks like is not entirely clear. Is it one Zoom? Is it a series of Zooms? Are there breakout sessions? Is it, you know, how do we decide on the stakeholders? The chief and I went through a long list of the, you know, the usual suspects of who would be our stakeholders, because we have so many community organizations that are very engaged in Ossining. And then beyond that, the deliverables would be, we want them to bring us a plan based on all of this input, all of these conversations with the police department, with the community stakeholders, with us, come up to us with a plan, and the draft needs to be done by X date, by the end of December. We have 2 weeks to review it internally, then it can go out to the public, like sort of putting that down as the terms of what we're looking for a proposal, getting a proposal, you know, from the folks we spoke to today, maybe from a couple of other similar types of consultants that have that skill set. Is that consistent with what people are envisioning? And I don't know what the dollar amount is associated with that. That's what we need to find out by putting together, or, you know, I hesitate to use the term request for proposal because that has its own parameters and rules associated with it. But really, you know, what we're asking for, so we can get some valuable proposals from some people we think might be well suited for this. Trustees.
That's what I had in mind. I see them as facilitators. I think oftentimes people look at consultants as experts in subject matter expertise that they bring. I don't see this as subject matter experts. The police department, PBA, the public, individuals, groups, us, staff, etc., we're the experts in what we want. This is a facilitation. We need to stop using the word consultants because I think it's confusing. Not subject matter expertise that we have. This is the bringing together of people. It also, I think, will add a comfort level. It's no different than somebody going to a third party if they have relationship issues with this person who's most important to them in their life. It's not to say that they're doing it because they just need a third party to have a comfortable space and the ability to feel that they're being heard. And I think that is important at this point in time. And so I am a proponent of this. I just think it's a facilitator to get conversations going, and not about sides and who's right and who's wrong. On the contrary, the other way around, the intent is to make things better. The intent is that I feel, and I'm not speaking for anybody else, this is a really great community to live in. This is a place that could probably be a shining star in how things have been done and can be done. And I'd actually would argue that we come out of this doing more of what we're already doing. And then in some sections, in some areas, we might find that there might be a policy that needs to be changed. There might be a communication tool that we didn't look at before that we might consider. There might be things that are outdated that we shouldn't be doing anymore. And that, I think, will come out from a facilitation like this. That's my hope. And that's why I am a supporter of this. I don't know how much it's going to cost. This is sort of new grounds in some ways, because it's usually police departments that do this on their own. I think that it's a great opportunity for us and we should jump on it. So I would like to find out if we could talk to 2 or 3 people who are great facilitators in community engagement and see what it looks like.
So I guess we're going to rely on the chief to really put his plan together, if I'm understanding this right. And this facilitator, or I'm going to call him a promoter, is going to put everybody together, all right, with the community engagement and this, that, and the other thing. And we're going to, then they're really not going to tell us what to put in our plan, if I'm understanding this correctly. You know, Chief Sylvester, I think, is probably got half the plan in his head already, but I'm just saying he's going to be the big piece of the puzzle here, and he's going to present, if I'm getting this right, you're going to present his plan. We're going to take community engagement, and this facilitator is going to bring everybody together on a Zoom or whatever it is, and we're going to take all the pieces of the puzzle, shake it up, and we're going to come out with a plan. Am I right? Am I wrong? I don't know.
Well, I think the piece where there's a disconnect, as I see it, is the answer to this question: would we get the same quality of feedback from the community if the conversations were led by a third party or by the police? And if you feel like we would, then there isn't nearly as much value in having a promoter, as you called it, or a consultant or facilitator or whatever. If you did, then it would. And if we're just talking about what are the recommendations for evidence-based police strategies, that's something it's technical, right? Like, do you really understand the nuances of de-escalation training and practices, studies addressing systemic racial bias, focused deterrence? Do you know what focused deterrence is? I don't know what focused deterrence is. And so it's very hard for me to have an opinion about those things, right? But the plan is meant to address community engagement to foster trust, fairness, legitimacy, and address racial bias and disproportionate policing in communities of color. And the nature of that conversation means that definitely you're going to be considering these technical evidence-based policing strategies, but the nature of the conversations are personal to the point that I think it behooves us to consider, would we get the same quality of responses if it was led, the conversations were facilitated by our police department versus a third party? And so that's how I would frame the question to you, Bob.
I'd like to, I think it might be helpful if we go back to what the governor sent to us on what we're supposed to be accomplishing. And there are a couple of things, because we talked initially about whether we bring in a facilitator, have these stakeholder community conversations and aggregate all of the information about law enforcement, these particular strategies. Or do we bring in somebody with law enforcement experience to help support this effort that the police are undertaking? So it's a few bullets. I'm going to hit on a couple of them, and maybe that'll just help people sort of envision what this process will look like. Each local government with a police agency must perform a comprehensive review of current police force deployments, strategies, policies, procedures, and practices, and provide a plan for improvement for the purpose of addressing the particular needs of the community served, and to promote community engagement to foster trust, fairness, and legitimacy, and to address any racial bias and disproportionate policing of communities of color. So that is very much needs to start from law enforcement. That's not people talking about their experience and feelings necessarily. That's really law enforcement experts need to help us with that evaluation, or it needs to be driven by our police department. So then the chief executive of the local government, that's us, will convene the police chief and community stakeholders to develop the plan that shall consider evidence-based policing strategies, quote, including but not limited to use of force policies, procedural justice, any studies addressing systemic racial bias or racial justice in policing, implicit bias awareness training, de-escalation training and practices, community-based outreach and conflict resolution, problem-oriented policing. And when you listen to that list, there are a number of words in there that we talk about all the time that we know are already happening here in Ossining. But having these conversations will highlight some of those, help us understand them, and then help us understand what else is on the table and could be incorporated and is being done well or could be done more. And this is where it's us convening the meeting, and where we would be bringing in a facilitator to help have these conversations so that all of this is understood. And then the municipality and the local police must consult with stakeholders, including members of the police department, members of the community with emphasis on areas with high numbers of police and community interactions, interested nonprofit and faith-based organizations, local office of a district attorney, public defender, and elected officials, and to create a plan to adopt and implement recommendations from the review and consultation. And then it goes into the plan gets approved by blah, blah. So that's what we're trying to accomplish here. So some of this needs to be driven much more so by the police department. What we're talking about right now and bringing a consultant in, the focus of tonight's conversation is bringing in a consultant to then use all that information from law enforcement to facilitate a conversation with stakeholders, gather up everything that's being understood from law enforcement and from the community to then put into a plan that we, the Board of Trustees, feel makes sense based on everything that we've done in partnership with the police and with stakeholders, that's been facilitated for us by these people that we're talking to. But their facilitation is a skill set that will help us take all of this information and put it into a plan that can then be reviewed by the community and approved by the board. Does that offer people a little more clarity on the role of law enforcement, the role of the facilitator, the role of the community, and our guiding of this process? Okay. I hope it's helpful to somebody, because that's what we're trying to accomplish here.
Thank you, Victoria. That kind of clarifies a lot of the stuff, and I read in sometimes the understanding of one person is the understanding is different understanding from other people, I guess. So, but I'm going to kind of piggyback on a little bit of what Omar said earlier in regards to what would be the difference if the police department was to do this, or if we have a third party helping us out with this. So I guess for me will be a little bit more like, and look, the chief said, his background, I don't have any doubts of the police department be able to handle this particular project. I just think there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of things that we have in our plate, and the way I'm figuring things with this particular person to come in and help is more like hiring a temporary assistant to the chief to be able to help him facilitate the engagement of the rest of the community to put all these items together and bring it back to us for a deeper conversation and deeper understanding. I think that's the way I would like to look at this. I think that's something that would be essential for us. Again, I'm okay with hiring a facilitator on this particular case and kind of move forward from there. You know, and I will hate to say that, let's say that we decide today, right now, you know what, we're not going to hire anybody. We're going to have our police department handle the whole thing. And as the chief stated early today, where he said, well, if we don't accomplish something, you know, then we can hire a consultant. The problem that I have with that is I don't want a police department to fail on something, or they feel that they cannot handle something in the middle of a couple of weeks from now or a month from now, and then we have to go back and start this process. And as you know, we do have a time-sensitive process that we need to accomplish. So in a way, I don't want to waste too much of that time. So I don't want to take those chances in regards to have to go back and hire someone if something happens.
Can I just add something there? So when I said before that, I mean, first off, I appreciate your concern for my time. I do want to share with the board, if the concern is that I'd be overworked, I know that most people know my family. They are incredibly supportive, and they understand the time constraints that would have to come with this. And some of them actually stayed on to watch the meeting tonight and are watching now. So hi, Mom. But also, when I said that, you know, if we do it wrong, you can then go on and find your consultant. That's sort of a double down dare. I mean, I'm not suggesting we can't do this. In fact, I'm saying so much that if I can't get this done, then you need to call me out on it. I mean, that's the job every single day of the board, is that if the work's not getting done with the police department, then the board is supposed to call me on that. What I'm saying, and just so, and listen, this is not to debate you. I just want to make sure that my position's clear. Number one, I have plenty of time to do this. I will dedicate my entire day and night to this. I have no problem with that. But number two, I have 100% confidence that me, together with the incredible staff we have here at the police department, can get this done. And also one last thing to add, there's been a lot of talk about time constraints. I started that. I was the one that said that we needed to get this done by the end of the year, because I was concerned that with changing boards that people would have new ideas come January, and that could throw a wrench into things. The reality is that we have until April, and even with the constraints of things like Thanksgiving and Christmas and you know, reorganizational meetings in January, I mean, if need be, this can go until April, and all that is to form the plan. That's not to actually execute on all the things that we're doing. And as you've all mentioned several times now, since we're doing most of these things, there's not a whole ton of implementation in terms of things like body-worn cameras and implicit bias training and all the heavy lifts. So in terms of time, if that's what's going to hold the board back, I just want to make clear I have plenty of it.
Thank you, Chief. You know, I'm going to defend my position on this. You know, I stand with what I said is not something that I don't think you can accomplish. I think it's something that will be essential for us to have a facilitator in here. So I'm be in favor of this. Obviously, this whole process is going to be weighing in on our chief's shoulders, you know, in regards to all the process and everything else, make sure that all the information is correct and everything. So to me, it's more like, you know, someone that is mediating between three different entities, you know, like the police department, us, obviously, and the public. So that's the way I feel. I'll be in favor to move from here, I guess, and to hire someone to help us facilitate this a little bit better.
Great. So we need the chief to lead a lot of this effort in reviewing the actual law enforcement policies. So Chief, I'm glad that you're ready, willing, and able to do that. I'm not hearing anybody give a different sense of what it is we're looking for the facilitator and what we'd be asking of a facilitator. So I think probably the next step is for us to talk with our staff about doing outreach and putting together, you know, a brief description of what we're looking for, and soliciting some proposals in short order for somebody to do the facilitating, which will help us clarify our next steps. But there's really no reason and I don't think the chief is even waiting for information for us to give directive on, reviewing the policies, because that needs to come from the police department. That whole first bullet point of that I read earlier about reviewing the police deployment and use of force, and I know that the police chief already started that in one capacity in reviewing what our use of force policies are, and so continuing with that, there's no reason to wait for us to hire a facilitator who will ultimately be helping guide some public engagement meetings for that to get started. Does anybody else want to chime in before we move on to the next topic, which is enforcement of COVID policies?
I'm ready to move on.
Great. Okay, so I'll follow up with Karen, and you can help us with some guidance of how we can do the outreach for getting some proposals from consultants, and then we'll all weigh in on that. Okay. So the next topic was kind of a late entry to, and Chief, please stay on if you can, because we definitely would like your help in figuring out this this next topic, which is sort of a late entry to the agenda, because it's something that we keep hearing more and more about, understandably, which is related to to enforcement of everything to do with wearing masks, keeping your distance. What are all of the guidelines? And they are changing a lot. And sometimes they're surprising. People don't realize behavior that you see that makes you uncomfortable might actually be allowed now, because now youth sports has started up and parks and playgrounds are open. But then there are questions that come to us about, well, are these people, do they need to be quarantining themselves? Do people need to be wearing masks when they go into a store? Are these businesses operating properly? And when people come to us, like I can't do enforcement, and it's not really clear on how to direct them. So if people, we have this see something, say something mentality in our country, and we don't know where to tell people what to say and to whom. And so part of what I'd like to get out of this last topic of tonight's discussion is just some clarity on what we can tell members of the public to do if they see a behavior that is concerning to them, that they think is going to undermine our efforts to reduce the rate of transmission. And so and are there enforcement mechanisms that we could put into place that don't exist right now as the Board of Trustees, or that the manager could put into place as part of the state of emergency? And with that, I invite my colleagues on the board or staff to chime in. We don't all need to talk more than necessary, because it's 10:06 and I know we're tired. But I do want to help try and figure this out.
To me, it's a straight-on question of, if we're all supposed to wear masks, is there a law that says we have to under this emergency? If there is, and you see a group of 6 teenagers, 6 men, 6 women, 6 soccer players, 6 tennis players, whatever, but they're not, or people having a big barbecue with 40 people, playing volleyball, hanging out, doing stuff, none of them are wearing masks. Does a resident have the ability to report that somewhere? Will they be able to call the police, who will come out and go up to the house or do something? What is the enforcement part of some of the rules of the game that we're all supposed to be following for the health of the entire community? Is the police the enforcer? If the police isn't, who is? When somebody calls me as a trustee or sends me an email, who do I send them to? And what happens?
So I totally understand what you're saying, Rika. And since this whole thing started, obviously, I'm in the fire department. I have radios and scanners, and I hear everything that goes on. And I can tell you, I can't count how many times that we're so lucky, because we have an engaged community, and people do call, and they call the police department, because how many times have they been sent up to the high school for groups of kids that are out on the field, people on the track, wherever it is? I hear it all the time. And, the police go there and they break it up, or they let them know. And, now, are they the fail-safe? I don't know. I understand Rika's question. ultimately, who's the enforcer? What are we telling people that they aren't already doing? Because, Chief, I'm sure you field calls all the time about this, and I know you do because I hear it on the radio. So I don't know. Do we need to send them? I guess, Rika, you're saying, what's the message we're sending out? You see something, you say something, but who do you say it to?
So we're sort of the catch-all department for everything in Ossining, mostly because our folks are good at dealing with things, and also because when everybody else goes home, we save everybody money by not calling in for overtime. So where the building department would ordinarily be dealing with businesses and things like that, oftentimes our cops will go because good-natured human beings can go in and say, hey, listen, there's a complaint about not wearing a mask, wear it, which really is the answer to this whole thing. You know, we've taken probably hundreds, if not thousands of calls at this point about a person without a mask, 2 people too close together, 6 people on a soccer field. And, you know, the real question everybody wants to know is what's being done. And I got to tell you, there's no better illustration of how a police department operates well than how the staff has handled this particular issue. Because if you're watching television, you're seeing all the protests and what it's really about. It's about over-enforcement of people of color for minor offenses, right? So now we have what's generally a minor offense, not wearing a mask, albeit there could be serious consequences, but that's true of just about every minor offense, and a $10,000 fine for it. Also, a lot of the calls that we get are about kids at the high school. Most of them being under 18 are going to be juveniles and couldn't take the ticket anyway because they can't have a criminal offense. So the reality of the situation is that what do our cops do? I know for a fact, I've talked to a couple of cops, I've seen it myself. They go to the high school oftentimes, and before the calls come in, they'll pull up and say, this is over their PA systems. This is a reminder to keep 6 feet between yourself and others. And if you can't, that you should wear a mask. They go down to Engle Park and they're walking through the park. And listen, there's a lot of people down there. And most of the people that are down there are coming from homes that don't have large pieces of property where they need to get out of the house and get some fresh air. Are some people too close together? Yeah. Some of them are families. I'll tell you that probably our most common call at this point is turning into, it really seems to be something about soccer and volleyball that gets people's attention. They're popular sports in Ossining. I don't know if there's other things that are leading to those calls coming in, but soccer and volleyball seem to really get people's attention. We see people playing soccer. They're trying their best to stay 6 feet apart. They're not necessarily playing games. They're kicking balls around. And it's recreation work. It's recreation activities that need to get in. People need to exercise. They need to get out of the house. People are going crazy staying home. So our cops are doing their best to build relationships, to show people the proper way to do things for the proper reason. It's a lot of reminders going on. To my knowledge, there's been 1 ticket for social distancing. It's been written in all of New York State. It was New York City. You can see the fist fight that broke out from it on television. There was a protest shortly thereafter. And since then, I think everybody's taken the position that we're going to do our best to educate people instead of use enforcement, although that enforcement's still there. Newcastle put something on the books that everybody has to wear a mask or you ticket them. Okay. I mean, that's Newcastle. I'll wait and see how many of those tickets get written or how many of those tickets get paid. You know, and people in Newcastle, they had a graduation. They have a big uptick in cases. That may be necessary there, but the reality is that even though we're at 13 cases or something like that right now, our numbers have been very, very low for quite some time now. For 35,000 people, give or take, between the town and village, 13 cases is not incredibly high compared to what we've seen. So, you know, we're pushing the cops to keep going out there and do it proactively, but certainly we're responding to the calls. And in terms of who people can call, they can always call us. The cops are getting a little bit frustrated because some of it is coming across as, you know, I'll tell you, some cops have come to me and they say that we feel like this is based on the color of the people that are out there. And they're saying, look, it's becoming a racial issue, that people see Hispanic people playing soccer and volleyball, and that's generating the call. We're not getting calls about other groups of kids out walking around. So, you know, there's a little bit of concern about how these things are received. And there's a lot of talk in the news about, you know, people making complaints against people and it being based on, you know, racially based. So we're balancing that out, and we're still talking to people. No matter what you call for, we'll still talk to people. The goal is to guide people instead of to harm them.
So New York State has a complaint intake form, which you can submit anonymously, and you can, you know, put in your information if you want to, and then you write identify the business entity or location of your complaint. Obviously, this isn't, you know, this doesn't help if there's like 6 people behaving in a dangerous way in a park in this moment. This is more like, you know, this business isn't requiring people to wear masks, or their staff isn't wearing masks, or something along those lines. what I'm wondering is, do we know what happens when people file these complaints? Is that those emails that I get from the county that I forward to you guys? And is there anybody in our staff who's receiving from New York State complaints violation complaint intake form?
No. The only complaints I get from the county or state are the ones that are sent to me by you. As you're likely aware, government tends to be really siloed at the state, county, and local levels. A lot of those things are created, from my perspective, as a feel-good mechanism for people to feel like they have somewhere to report things. No, it never goes anywhere. So I don't know if Department of Health from New York State is supposed to be sending representatives around, but if it's anything like the rest of the state agencies, we don't usually see representatives coming here to enforce things. Oftentimes, State Liquor Authority, Department of Health, they ask us to do it. So like I said, the police department tends to be the catch-all. Certainly for those not emergent things, it's nice for people to be able to send those emails if they're going to filter back to us anyway. I have to tell you, the anonymous complaint is really probably the worst invention in the history of the world, because it's encouraged people to, we love if you see something, say something, but people really feel free to sort of call the police for everything on their neighbors, where, historically, these are sometimes things better that if you just talk to your neighbors about, not necessarily with businesses or maybe with businesses, but, I'm sitting in on other meetings throughout the week where they talk about community building efforts. And I think that one of the things Ossining needs to do differently is neighbors need to go out and meet each other. Because the reality is that this speaks right to the nature of policing, in that we shouldn't have to send a cop to tell you to turn your music down. Your neighbors should be comfortable enough to come over and knock on the door and say, hey, the kids are trying to sleep now. Likewise with masks, to an extent, you should be able to say to your neighbors, like, hey, look, we don't want to get sick. We'd appreciate it if you wore a mask. If people refuse, we're there. But the anonymous complaints are sort of making this challenging. So still, we'll continue to go on the calls.
Wow. So I just want to say that I really appreciate you saying that, Chief. The pattern of what you all are seeing in terms of the complaints, I'm unsurprised, but grateful to hear it straight from the source, and appreciate the direction for what to tell people when they want to report something. So that is helpful. There is no, we're now in stage 4 or phase 4, and there are no phases 5, 6, 7, and so forth. And so we don't exactly know what happens from here from a kind of state perspective, guidelines, whereas that was much clearer when we were at like stage 1 or phase 1 or 2. Now things are changing a little bit. So this is in some ways similar to the census and some other things, where it's going to have a certain amount of salience coming from authorities, but it's really a matter of kind of hyper micro local conversations and enforcement. And I know that has been the case here in my community, and my hope is that it continues. Because what I don't want to see is now we then start to see enforcement happening in a way that creates further problems. That would be awful. So let's not do that. So thank you, Chief.
Karen, is there any information that you can provide? Because we get a lot of different types of complaints, like some of them, maybe calling the non-emergency number for the police department could be the most helpful resource to help address a potential problem. But sometimes, other departments that are part of your purview, like the building department, is there ever an occasion where we should be encouraging people to call the building department, or do they just we need people want to feel empowered to be able to address
the building department is responsible for ensuring that businesses are complying with the rules that are mandated them to perform their function. So that would be using certain PPE and certain protocols, depending on the nature of the business. Those businesses have been well informed about what those processes are, what they need to do, and it's a little bit different. So if there's a business where people are not wearing masks, or they're letting too many people into indoors at one time, and they're not complying with the rules that apply, again, every business is a little bit different, then the building department will respond to that. After, like at a certain point, the consequences for a business, I think, are a little bit different, and probably something that I don't want to say are easy to address, but if you have a business that's non-compliant, there's also the fallout that business can suffer by just people knowing that they're not compliant. That's not really a good thing for business. So there's that aspect, which makes it a little bit different than a group of people in a park who may or may not be related now, aren't wearing masks, but maybe they don't really need to be. As far as the consequences of that, we have certain businesses have been reported to the Department of Health in Westchester County for not complying, and my understanding is the Department of Health will be following up with them as well. These are health violations. As far as the building department handling these in terms of issuing tickets, that's something that we have to really discuss internally, because I don't know that we have that capacity right now.
Most of the building complaints, most of the ones building department would handle tend to come in at like 4:35 on a Friday afternoon, right after they've left. So pretty much handling those too. The building department's mostly doing like a lot of follow-up work on these things. We're trying to make work out of this.
We do get a lot of complaints on the weekends, and the police are, will go check on things when the building department's not working. But that said, we also get a lot of complaints. They get a lot of calls too, so we are following up, and whatever complaints come in after hours on the weekend are followed up with again with the building department.
So could you sum up for me? Is there a concise way that we can empower community members who have legitimate concerns? And I absolutely hear the concern about disproportionately people raising concerns directed about people of color, young people who are a perceived threat more than some other group of people. And that is not what I'm trying to encourage, but there are some really valid concerns that people have about behaviors that, people are becoming less vigilant. They're becoming a little more comfortable in groups. They're becoming more comfortable because we're able to go out and have a meal or play a soccer game. And those things are allowed now. And so when people have real valid concerns about a business, it sounds like what I'm hearing is if you're concerned about how a business is conducting themselves or allowing their customers to behave, contact the building department. Obviously on the weekends, it sounds like that responsibility is falling to the police department anyway. If people have a concern, somebody brought to our attention, they believe that their neighbor just came back from Florida and isn't quarantining. So, who responds to that? I don't even know how you address that. Is that where I say, here's a link to the New York State complaint form. Go, and I can see why somebody would want to be anonymous. You don't want to say, hey, that's my neighbor over there. They should be locked in their house. Who's going to make them do that? It's sort of a voluntary thing anyway. Like people are very anxious. Right.
So I think, look, it is really impossible for either the police department or the building department or anybody to respond to a complaint about somebody who is making an assumption on somebody else about what they're doing without facts on that. And I don't know of any way, unless it was a business owner that's not compliant, that's where sort of the jurisdiction of the building department would lie. They're really looking at businesses that are not compliant. I do think that some things can be filed on the state website. That I know it's not a perfect thing, but I'm not sure that sometimes, again, you run into the same issues. Sometimes people's perception of what's happening versus what's really happening are different. And I don't know that anybody has really good answers to this, because I think the chief said best. We continue to set good examples. We are out there, and it's not, during the day, it's the building department, it's the sanitation department, because there's a lot of things that are happening now that, we don't get necessarily the same types of complaints that the police department gets, but we get complaints about not just people not wearing masks, about garbage, about sanitation, about a lot of things, because people out and about, and they're using the parks a little bit differently than they may have previously. So we're trying to address that. We're working with the town at the waterfront to make sure there's enough trash receptacles, to putting on more staff to address that. And to the degree that we can do that, it's, you know, we are doing that. Part of it is also, you know, the police are also down at the parks at night, because that's usually when they get hardest hit. And once, you know, when they get hit at night, you know, the garbage is overflowing in the morning. You know, if somebody can't get to it immediately, there's an animal in there, it makes a huge mess. But, you know, we also are working collaboratively with the police department too, to make sure that, you know, people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and you know, and treating the parks with respect if they're there at night, enjoying a picnic or a dinner or whatever it is. So in the difficult times that we have, I think that, you know, we're in a community that's working as hard as we can to address issues that are a bit challenging to address, where there's a lot of gray area. I know it's not what everybody wants to hear, but I think it's just the reality of the situation. But certainly if you have a concern, you know, again, the nature of the concern, the magnitude of the concern would dictate whether you're going to make an emergency call or a non-emergency call. I think most of these are non-emergency calls, but certainly call and we'll do our best to address it.
All right. Does anybody else have any further thoughts on this particular topic? Because we still have a special session ahead of us.
So, is there any reason why we couldn't put on the website, breaking it up, what to call a non-emergency number, or the building department if it's related to a business, and get the message out there? Because right now we're just talking about it. There's no real message out there, or has there been a message out there that we could put this on the website just as, you know, a point of reference for these people that are looking to make a phone call?
I mean, my perspective on this from the law enforcement, I mean, you said yourself that you've heard how many calls were going on with this. I'm not sure people don't know how to get in touch with us at this point. But, you know, and I'm sort of reluctant to encourage more people to be calling because, you know, God, we're out there patrolling and seeing these things. And for the most part, when we ask people to comply, they do. So it's not that everyone has their mask on is doing the right thing. People sometimes don't. We ask them to fix it and they do. The other thing is that that's going to be a really complex message because there's a number of things that go to us. There are certain things go to the building department. And that whole issue of somebody going to Florida, there's nowhere to report that. And that's what I've been saying since day one of coronavirus is that New York State goes and throws out all these things that everybody should be doing, and there's no enforcement mechanism behind them. So the only thing that I could find on New York State's website is that they have a hotline that I suppose people could call, but there's nothing saying what's going to happen. So I don't know. We'd have to put together a long list of places that people could call. It definitely would be a complex message, but you could.
I concur with the chief on this. I think that, again, I don't think people are having a problem calling or knowing to call based on the number of calls we get. I think it's similar to any other complaints. I think that by putting a number out there, we may be setting an expectation that's not realistic in terms of people's perception of complaints and what's, you know, and what we can actually do about those things. That's my biggest concern, because aside from ensuring that businesses operate the way they're supposed to be operating, you know, based on the rules that apply to businesses, besides, you know, making sure that people are being as respectful as possible, again, you're getting to a point where gatherings of certain number of people is no longer not you know, is permitted. So I think that the gray areas here are so significant. I wouldn't even begin to know how to define, you know, to put that in a narrow box of what people should do.
I agree with you. You know, let's leave well enough alone and we just keep moving forward here.
I think that putting a different spin on it, so certainly, like, you know, we've been doing a lot more social media, thanks to Jaime, who's really got a regular schedule of posts that go out. And, you know, we have warnings on, today it was ticks, you know, like it could be anything that, you know, is very timely, and a whole range of stuff that goes out there. I think the best thing we can do is just keep reminding people, be safe, be considerate, wear a mask, wash your hands, put your garbage in a trash receptacle. Like, you know, if you bring it in a park, bring it out, you know, like those are the things that we can keep reinforcing to people, and hope that you know, in these situations, a lot of it comes down to peer pressure too, you know, so.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I mean, it's not, it is frustrating, I think, for everybody, because these orders coming from the governor are something that are related to things that are so incredibly important to the health and safety of our community. And yet we're kind of we're really relying on people to just pay attention and to do the right thing for their health and for their community's health. The one area that I have a better understanding of right now is when there are particular concerns about businesses, that if somebody's aware of a business not following all of the guidelines, that's an area where we do have some enforcement, primarily through the building department. And so that's a helpful takeaway for me, although that's not the majority of the complaints we hear, but that is one area where we can have some clear guidelines of enforcement. All right, thank you everybody for providing us with the insights to the best of your ability in this ever evolving, frustrating circumstance that we're in. Does anybody need to say anything more about this before we move into our very exciting special session?
This is separate. Is this special session is another Zoom meeting, or we're staying on?
No, yeah, we can stay here, but I think we need to have a motion to enter into. Do we, Stuart? I'm looking at you. Do we need to have a motion?
You need a motion to go into you need a motion to adjourn and go into special legislative, please.
So moved.
We need a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All righty. So, Stuart, are you our clerk right now?
I am, thank you. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the board on either of the two resolutions to be voted on this evening? Okay.
No,
Hearing no
Mr.
one?
Second.
No hands?
No hands. We're good. We're good.
Resolution A, home rule message requesting enactment of New York State Assembly Bill A 7767A and New York Senate Bill S 5796B. Resolved that on behalf of the Village of Ossining, the mayor hereby requests from the Senate S 5796B and the Assembly A 7767A of the State of New York the enactment of a special law, otherwise known as a home rule request, which legislation entitled An Act Authorizing the Commissioner of General Services to transfer and convey certain unappropriated state land to the Village of Ossining, County of Westchester, and providing for the repeal of such provisions upon expiration thereof, would authorize the Commissioner of General Services, subject to the consent of the Commissioner of Corrections and Community Supervision, and a formal request by the Village of Ossining within 1 year after the effective date of the special law, transfer to the Village of Ossining a part of lot within tax identification number 97.10-1-4, more particularly a portion equaling approximately 1.615 acres that includes the Sing Sing Correctional Facility 1936 Powerhouse Building, subject to the condition precedent and the restrictions and reverter in the Act. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I think there should probably be some comments and explanation on the board. This is something that we discussed last week. And for anybody who's following along, the language in the resolution that Stuart just read has been updated since the resolutions that were included when we posted this, the agenda for this special session originally. And thank you very much to Stuart for being so conscientious in reading all of the language in both the Senate and Assembly bills that this is referencing, and for making updates as late as this afternoon so that we have everything, so that everything is in order. I really very much appreciate Stuart's attention to detail on this. And I'll start, and I welcome the input of my colleagues on the board with just giving folks some context. If you didn't tune in last week when we had Sandy Galiff on with us, the Sing Sing Prison Museum project is something that the village has been a part of for a number of years now, and we have recently have some increasing questions as we get closer and closer to being in a position to the village actually playing a role that isn't exactly what we thought the role would be. We have more questions about what the liability is for the village, what the obligations would be for the village if we were to take this on. So what we're doing tonight in passing this resolution for a home rule message is simply allowing for Assemblywoman Galiff and Senator Carlucci to put forward these local laws so that we would have this pathway as an option to potentially help the Sing Sing Prison Museum to be successful. We're not committing the village to anything, and it would be irresponsible for us to commit to the village to anything at this point, because we still have a lot more questions that haven't been addressed and would need to be addressed in a very formal, thoughtful way, so that we are not exposed as a relatively small village to too much liability or to too much financial risk. So there could be other paths to success for the Sing Sing Prison Museum other than the one that this could lead to. But if we don't act now to pass this resolution for a home rule message, then it may be another year before the Assembly and the Senate take up these types of laws. And so if we don't do it now, then we would be closing off this option for consideration or for us to explore as a possible path to success. So I want to lay that out there and then ask my colleagues on the board if they want to offer any further clarification or thoughts on this process, because it's not universally supported as the very, we've got legal advice and advice from our manager that there's risk involved with this. And so we take that into account. Because we are not right now signing on to do anything that would we're not undertaking that risk at this point. So anybody else want to comment from the board?
So, sorry, go ahead, Manny.
Go ahead. No, please go ahead. I guess not. Thank you, Mayor, for the update on that one. As I've been involved in this project for many years, and I really like the concept of what the potential project of what could be for us. In everything, in any decisions that we take, not just on this one, I think there's a risk. There's a chance that may not work or may work, and there's things that we worked along the process. And then we make it work. And there are times that we have that we have to walk away, and we have walken away from, for things that we had previous decisions in the past and regardless of what the project has been. Taking this and making a decision, I think I'm hoping it will be something that will be successful. So I'm in favor of this at this point. And if at some point we need to walk away, we can do that as well. But at this point, again, I'm confident and I'm supportive of this.
Great. I just want to build on the point of walking away. Not only are we not committing to this, we have a whole year to sort of go through this process and see if this is a path that is going to work for us. But even if we ever did take conveyance of the building, if it doesn't ultimately become used for the purpose that's stated here for the prison museum, then we don't get stuck with the building. It's not like another 200 Main Street scenario where decades from now we're still figuring out what to do with this old building. It reverts back to the state. So if it doesn't get utilized for the express purpose here, it would revert back to the state. So that is one of the, I think, really important clauses of this proposed law if we did move forward with it.
I was going to, like the mayor and Manny, I'm in support, and I think that this board and I think previous boards have been very supportive of Census Museum, and it's taken on different shapes. For me, I want to make it clear to the public that the village manager and our attorney and separate counsel have very serious and legitimate concerns about the liability involved and what we might be taking on. What we're doing tonight, and this was a discussion last week, and this is a continuation of that, is we're leaving the door open. We may have to close that door. We may open the door wider, but this is a step in keeping the door open. There might be other paths by going to the county, which I know the village manager is working on her suggestion. I mean, this was an idea she came up with, and kudos for thinking of that. But I do want the board of the museum to really clearly understand that for the public record, and all of this becomes public record, it's highly recommended, at least from my perspective, that we start thinking not only about the amazing initiative that this is and the power of strategically and the vision of what this could be, but start thinking about where the rubber meets the road and operationalizing both the organization and the museum, because it's where the rubber hits the road that we are now seeing some, let's call it rocks in the road, not barriers. Where there were some real issues. A few years ago, I had reminded the mayor that I remember sitting on the board a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and it was presented that we were voting on being a pass-through so that the museum can get grants. So of course that was a yes vote, a thumbs up on all our parts, but in fact that's not really what happened. Upon further investigation, it turns out not so much a pass-through, but actually we might be taking liability beyond our ability, especially if the market, and it will, be in a downturn, and taking up bonds and putting ourselves on a bigger hook than a village of our size might want to do. So we're right now keeping the door open, moving on to the next step. But I want to be clear that this board is very much aware that going forward, it's going to have to be under a microscope, not just a telescope to the future. And I want that to sort of go on public record. I've sat in a number of meetings. There is an amazing opportunity for this village to be involved in this project. There could be some really unbelievable stuff and really forward-thinking initiatives coming out of Sing Sing Museum. It's bigger than just a museum. I mean, the project is terrific, but it also needs to be operationalized. There's finances that have to be in place, professionalism that has to be put in place, so that the public in Ossining can be of help rather than it become a financial burden to this community over the next few years. And that's really what we're doing tonight. Is I'm supporting opening that door, keeping that door open, and moving one step closer, but with that caveat in mind.
Okay, well, I've heard 3 of us have similar sentiments and support and concerns for how we can be supportive of this going forward. Do either of the other trustees want to comment, or are you ready to just vote on this?
No, I'm in full support of it.
Me too.
All right, well, then all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Resolution B, authorization for the mayor to sign a separation agreement with an employee. Resolved that upon review by the village's Labor Council and Corporation Council, the mayor is authorized to sign the separation agreement and general release with employee number 035035. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So, second.
Comments on the board? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. So does that mean, I don't think we have executive session tonight, do we?
No.
No.
How exciting. Okay, so then can I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. So with that, I say thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you next week in a Zoom room very much like this. Be well.
Thank you.